Good evening, Dylan.
Good evening, sir. How are you?
Doing well. All right, everyone. Well, thank you for joining us. I know you all have a lot going on, but I think that we have some very important information to share with all of you, and we're happy to share it. Both Dylan and I are attorneys. We practice in somewhat different areas of the law. Dylan is the expert here. I kind of help facilitate this, but I want you to hear mostly from him. But I do want to introduce myself and tell you why I am here and why I'm participating in this webinar and Q&A session with all of you. My name is Michael Karikomi. I'm a partner at the law firm of Katchko, Vitiello, and Karikomi here in Los Angeles. I feel for all of you, to varying degrees, we've all been impacted by these fires. Our homes have been impacted, our lives, our families. For me personally, this has been tough because my in-laws, who are Palisades residents, have lived in the same home for the past 15 years. They lost their home in the Palisades fire, and I've seen the devastation it's caused. I would like to share. I have a short kind of slide presentation that I'll share with all of you, not only including some of the information that we want to provide, but some visual evidence for me personally, of just how this has impacted us. So this is a photo of my in-laws' home, their beautiful home in the Palisades on the left before, and this is what's left on the right after the fire. So, they were, my understanding is they were able to get up today. I haven't spoken with them since, but I'm sure it was very emotional. My three children, who are 4, 7, and 9, spent a big chunk of their childhood growing up in the Palisades, spending every big family gathering, all of our holidays together at this house. A lot of incredible memories. They took their first steps in this home. They learned to ride their bike on this street. I know what you guys are dealing with, and I saw the need for information to be provided to all of you from an attorney's perspective, or in this case, multiple attorneys' perspectives, in terms of just the basics when it comes to filing a homeowner's insurance claim. Understanding your policy, understanding what coverages you have, understanding what issues might come up, understanding when and why you might consider engaging certain other professionals to assist you with the claims process. But I am a civil litigation attorney and not some kind of wildfire expert or fire claims expert. I practice primarily in employment law, personal injury law. Yes, I've handled claims involving fire, mold, water, those types of things, first party property damage claims. But this is not a specialty of mine, which is why I've invited, and he's generously agreed to participate, Dylan, because Dylan is an expert. He is not only an expert when it comes to fire claims, but he's also an expert. And I know many of you are insured by California Fair Plan, and we'll get into some particulars about California Fair Plan. But Dylan has litigated many cases, some of those class action cases against Fair Plan. And so he is kind of not only my go-to, but a lot of others. I've been in communication with some of you, and I know just the feedback I've gotten from many is that Dylan is the man. And so I don't want to take up too much of your time with hearing from me. I will cover some of the basics and then turn the floor over to Dylan to cover all the rest, because I really do believe that he is the one that you guys should hear from. And I am handling my in-laws claim, and I've heard from a bunch of people in the community about where they are in this process. I won't go into the particulars of where I'm at with their claim, but it varies. I've heard different things, and Dylan is going to provide a bunch of examples of what he's dealt with on behalf of clients, in particular with Fair Plan, but other insurance carriers as well. And also joining us is Dawn Marie Bolstad-Johnson, who is a hygienist, and Dylan has invited Dawn to share her valuable insight when it comes to remediation and the things you need to be considering in terms of the safety of your home and what needs to be done in terms of reconstruction or, again, remediation, the homes that are still standing. She will share her expertise towards the end of the presentation today. One of the things I really wanted to touch on, and I hosted a webinar Q&A last week, some of which had some of the information we'll share today. But I noticed that, just like all of you, I was just getting flooded through social media, online, emails about wildfire attorneys. And I'll put that in quotes. And I'm not here to talk about any particular firms, but do your due diligence. There are a lot of law firms and attorneys who are advertising their services. I will be very frank and straightforward with you. I've told many people this, and I believe it. The vast, vast majority of you do not need an attorney to file an insurance claim. You may not need an attorney throughout the entire process. Dylan, I'll let Dylan talk about, the scenarios that are likely to come up where maybe it is appropriate for you to engage a professional, whether that's an attorney, a public adjuster, contractors, people who practice in certain fields where they may be able to provide valuable assistance, but that is not always the case. If the time comes that you do find yourself in a position, which would be unfortunate, that you do need an attorney or a public adjuster, just do your due diligence. There are now hundreds of attorneys advertising their services for these homeowners claims related to fire damage or complete loss of your home. And you want to find somebody you can trust, somebody that you communicate well with, somebody who's obviously qualified, but don't, click the first ad and sign up with whatever firm. It may not be, certainly in this early claims process that you are all in, it will likely not be in your financial best interest to sign away a chunk of the money that you are going to receive from the insurance company. Again, everyone's situation is different, and I'm speaking just generally throughout this presentation. So, be thoughtful. You are all, successful people, you're intelligent people, and I am here to really arm you, and Dylan is here especially to give you knowledge about this process, some insight into just the basic understanding of your policy, what coverages you have, and then beyond that, the situations that come up which may require professional advice and professional representation. Knowledge is power. I keep repeating this, but it really is true. It is the biggest motivation for me feeling the need and being inspired to present this information to all of you today, because it's impossible to cover everything, but there are, not only through webinars like this, and there are plenty being hosted from very insightful people, but there are also a lot of online resources. Arm yourselves with as much information as possible as it relates to the insurance claims process that you're going through. One of the websites that Dylan and I both have found to be very consumer friendly is United Policyholders. The link is on this slide. I'll also drop it into the chat. It's one of, for myself personally, the best online database that I have found for homeowners. Has everything from templates for letters, templates related to other, claims, information that you will need to provide to your insurance carrier or your insurance company, has videos, just a whole database of helpful information, and it's a good resource to rely upon. I don't want to sugarcoat things for all of you, though. The insurance company is not necessarily your friend. Insurance companies are in the nature or in the business of denying claims or minimizing your claims if possible. So the more you know, the more level the playing field is. So, again, for the vast majority, you may be able to handle this on your own. If you feel that you're overwhelmed, if you reach an impasse in a serious dispute with your insurance company and the amount that they're giving you under different types of coverages is just not acceptable, and you believe that you are being wronged, that might be the time to reach out to a professional, like an attorney or a public adjuster. I've also dropped this link, and it is directly from the United Policyholders website. Their top 10 insurance claims tips, and they're all great tips, but I want to focus on one in particular, which happens to be their number one tip and is probably what I would have picked as my number one tip. And that is to Document everything, right? Documentation rules the day. Keep very detailed notes. Every conversation that you have with your insurance adjuster, whether it's California Fair Plan or a different insurance company related to the damage to your home or the loss of your home, document all of those calls. Keep a claims journal, where you're recording the date, the time that you speak with someone, the representative's first name, and what was discussed. Everything that is exchanged in writing, emails, letters, create a completely separate file. Take photos when you are safely able to return to your property, whether it's still standing or it's a total loss. Photos, videos, both of your home, your personal belongings. Make sure that you document those because it's going to be extremely helpful throughout the claims process. That is, regardless of whether you reach some kind of dispute with your insurance company or not, but especially true, in litigation when a case is filed and there's a big dispute over what you're owed, then having documents and records of everything that was discussed, all of the damage that your property sustained is vitally important. Keep copies of all of the receipts and invoices for your out-of-pocket expenses that could be related to the claim. When in doubt, keep everything filed away. That will ensure that you have all of that information at your disposal, all of those documents at your disposal to substantiate your claim. When you meet with a field adjuster or an appraiser from the insurance company at the site of your property, once again, take your notes. I've had clients, we video record some of these walkthroughs, take photos. That way you have that as a backup. Don't rely on the adjuster documenting everything appropriately. I want to dive into, again, some of the basics, and we'll start with the declarations page and your policy itself. And if you haven't already, you should immediately request from your insurance company. I'm going to be somewhat focused on Fair Plan because I know many of you are insured by Fair Plan, but a lot of this information will pertain to any insurance company or any insurance policy, homeowners policy that you have related to the fire loss. But you should request a copy of the policy and a copy of your declarations page, which would be included directly from either your insurance carrier, or if you've worked with an insurance broker, they should be able to get that for you. What is a declarations page? A declarations page, it's typically the very first page of your policy, and it's going to include very important information. The types of coverage you have under your homeowner's policy, the coverage limits in that policy that pertain to the different types of coverage, and the applicable deductibles if they apply. In addition to the declarations page, there's also going to be the policy itself, sometimes referred to as a jacket. It will include certain addendums or riders. These are the agreements, the contracts, the definitions that will pertain to your policy. I've dropped into the chat a sample of a Fair Plan policy, and it's likely not going to vary from your particular policy. This is a templated document that should pertain to most, if not all of you. So you can refer to that, but you should request your policy nonetheless. And moving on, I've copied a redacted declarations page just so you can follow along. I've also put that in the chat in case it's not visible to some of you to make it clear. And you can see from here that on the far left, there's some boxes again that have been redacted. They will be checked if you have that type of coverage. Immediately to the right is the type of coverage. Sometimes it's alphabetized and you'll see A, B, C, D, and then there's some additional coverages underneath. And then to the right of that, you have the limits of coverage. And that is the amount of coverage you have, the maximum amount of coverage you have under those specific types of coverage. Couple of terms of art that are going to come up throughout this presentation that I want all of you to be familiar with. Actual cash value. And I'm going to use this right now, both as it pertains to your personal property and the dwelling itself. But the actual cash value is a type of coverage that provides for the cost to repair or replace the home or personal property, less depreciation. So it accounts for depreciation. things in your home, for example, paint, some flooring that would depreciate over time. You know, in the example of personal property, if I have an old watch and it's one of these Apple watches and it's an outdated model, it's probably not worth the same amount of money that I paid for it initially. So that would be the actual cash value to replace that item or that part of your dwelling that needs to be repaired or replaced. Replacement cost, the type of coverage that provides for the cost to repair or replace the home or the personal property without depreciation. So what it actually would cost to replace either a dwelling or your personal property without calculating for depreciation. And sometimes applicable, and again, this is something that will be specific under your own declarations page if you have something called extended replacement costs, which pertains to the dwelling. And this gives you an additional amount of money. So even though you may have coverage under coverage A, your dwelling coverage, if the actual cost of replacing the dwelling is more than what is itemized there in your coverage limits for the dwelling coverage, if you have that box selected, which you can see in the declarations page, under Fair Plan, it's 25%. It can vary insurance carrier from one insurance carrier to the other. But if there is additional costs, for instance, right now with the amount of demand, the cost of materials, inflation, things like that, it may cost more than what your dwelling coverage affords for, but it will allow you to get additional coverage under the extended replacement cost of your dwelling. Let's go back to, so coverage A, and this is probably for a lot of you, the biggest and most important type of coverage. It's your basic dwelling coverage. It's covering your house and all the structures that are attached to it, such as the attached garages and decks. And again, typically referred to as coverage A in almost every homeowner's insurance policy. The precise dollar amount of the basic dwelling coverage, again, the coverage limit is also on your declarations page. We had already discussed extended dwelling coverage, but I want to reiterate that because due to the massive wildfire damage, we will certainly all face an increased local demand for labor and materials, and it may create a much higher cost to replace the dwelling. So if you have that type of coverage, it will be a benefit to you. Dwelling replacement costs. This is slightly different. It is limited by coverage A, the total amount of coverage, but it allows for you to replace your dwelling, repair your dwelling without the calculation for depreciation. So it's going to be better than the actual cash value of the dwelling replacement that you have under coverage A if you have that box checked. Other structure coverage, which is also usually identified in most policies as coverage B. This is to cover your dwelling, the attached structures to your dwelling. For instance, guest houses, cottages, freestanding garage, pool, things of that nature. There are a number of different coverage buckets. We refer to the different types of coverages sometimes as buckets of coverage that you can shift. For instance, you can use 10% of the coverage A limit of liability for a loss to other structures. So you can shift in certain situations, depending on the policy language, you can shift coverages around. There are limitations to those. And for instance, in this situation, this is a Fair Plan example. The payment under the coverage reduces the coverage of coverage A limit of liability by the amount paid for the same loss. So in other words, if you were to borrow from bucket A for bucket B, it reduces bucket A. Code upgrade coverage in Fair Plan policies, it's referred to as ordinance or law coverage. So for instance, if your home needs to be repaired or rebuilt and you were up to code previously when that section of the house or whatever needs to be repaired or rebuilt was originally constructed, you will be afforded up to the coverage limits for any kind of code compliance costs that come your way. Coverage for your personal property. So we're now shifting from the dwelling into your personal property. You know, many of us have lost personal property such as clothing, home furnishing, kitchenware, appliances, and jewelry. This is referred to in most policies and in the FAIR Plan policies as coverage C. There are some exclusions there. And again, refer to the sample if you're a FAIR Plan insured, the sample policy that was provided, and it will list out the exclusions. And some of those examples are on this slide: banknotes, bills, coins, currency, etc. And you should refer to your policy to see exactly what's excluded. The same way you may have replacement costs, if you have that type of coverage for your dwelling, you could also have replacement costs for your personal property. So once again, you are entitled to replacement costs that does not factor in depreciation. There's always going to be an added benefit when you have replacement cost coverage. There are certain personal property items that are excluded from replacement cost coverage. Some of those are listed on this slide, such as memorabilia, souvenirs, items, similar articles. So antiques, fine arts, again, referred to the policy itself. And you can see the entire list of excluded personal property that would not be covered under replacement cost coverage. Coverage for living expenses after the fire. A lot of you have asked me personally questions about this. This is vitally important, I know, to all of you. If you've been displaced from your home, whether it's standing or not, then you've had to incur usually significant expenses, whether that's renting a hotel, leasing a new apartment or home. That is all covered under what in a FAIR Plan policy is coverage D. FAIR Plan policies, it's similar but not quite the same. It calls it loss of fair rental value. This is similar to your additional living expenses. Under the FAIR Plan policy for coverage D, you're looking at the coverage for what it would cost to rent your home or a similar home in the area before the loss, and that is what you are entitled to. There are some restrictions FAIR Plan policies have that you are entitled to up to 1/12 of the coverage limit that you have per month. So even if you lived in a very expensive home, there are limitations in terms of what you can receive per month. It does not mean, though, that you can't exhaust your policy limits so long as you can prove that it was necessary and that the costs, again, are in line with the cost of renting a similar home. So there's just some additional information, in terms of some distinction between fair rental value that we already covered. And once again, you have the ability to shift from bucket to bucket. Here, you can use 10% of coverage A limit of liability that relates to your dwelling for loss of fair rental value. So if there's an immediate need there, you have the ability to shift, and you can, speak to your adjuster during the claims process and request that. In the state of emergency, which we are currently in, FAIR Plan covers the fair rental value for 24 months. This is actually universal, and it's subject to the limit of coverage, but it can also be extended for an additional 12 months. So even though you can only get 1/12 of the total amount per month under your coverage, you can spread that out at the 36 months at a maximum if there's good cause, but 24 months given the state of emergency that we're in. There are also a bunch of other insurance regulations in place. Given, again, the state of emergency, there are restrictions and there are benefits that you have as homeowners under your homeowners insurance policies that you can take advantage of. I've dropped in the notice from the California Insurance Commissioner, which covers the vast majority of those. And it's a good reference to familiarize yourself with them. Dylan will probably speak with you further about some of those particular insurance protections under the state of emergency. Wanted to, before I pass the microphone to Dylan, just do a brief introduction. He'll give you a lot more about his background, but I actually first contacted Dylan when I got into this process on behalf of my in-laws, some other clients, because I found his name. It was popping up everywhere. He has litigated many cases against Fair Plan, has represented many homeowners in bad faith claims against homeowners insurance companies. And from the first phone call, found him to be extremely insightful, very willing to share his knowledge and expertise in this field. And I was just amazed really by, the wealth of knowledge and his experience in litigating cases with Fair Plan. And with that, I'll pass the mic to Dylan and let him share all of his insight with all of you.
Michael, thank you very much for including me today, and hello to all of you. I just want to take a giant step back to start and acknowledge that you have all been through a giant loss, a giant trauma. And having been through wildfires with hundreds of families for going on 20 years, I can say I haven't experienced it, but I have a sense of the scope of the loss, the scope of the trauma. And I want to just say I'm sorry. We're going to be talking a lot about technical things. Michael's already covered a number of items, but including the rights that you have in California and various rules that apply and various resources that you're going to be able to turn to. But I think it's useful at the outset, and Michael shared his personal experience, and I don't have that to share. But what I can say is that having been through this with lots and lots of families over the years, it's critically important that you keep in mind that you've just been through a trauma. If you go through a car accident, if you have a death in your family, if you have an illness, we all know that it takes some time to come back. It takes some time to recover, and your ability to manage in those periods can be compromised. And what I'm going to do as much as I can in this conversation and going forward is to assist you in that process. But it's critical that, and I sound like I'm preaching, and I apologize, but having been through this many, many times with many families, what I can say is that there are a few things that set folks back that are I see over and over again. So here's some general advice. Don't rush. Be careful. Don't abandon the skills that you have developed over your adult life, which put you where you are, in a beautiful home, in a beautiful community. Keep those skills in the front of your mind as you're going forward with your insurance carrier and with your insurance claim. I'm going to repeat a few things Michael said because I think it makes sense. Ask questions from your insurer, from anybody who comes to your home, to the experts that you hire. Videos and pictures. At every opportunity, take videos and pictures. Take notes. As Michael said, keep a notebook. If possible, communicate in writing to your carrier. There will be phone calls, and that's fine, but a careful record is critical, and it probably won't surprise you that when push comes to shove and disputes arise, your memory and the carrier's memory may differ. So to the extent you can communicate in writing, do that. If you're having phone calls, send a confirming email. We discussed X, Y, and Z. We agreed to A, B, and C. Maybe the most important thing, if something happens in your insurance claim going forward and it doesn't sit right, assume you're right and the other side is wrong. Use your instincts. Make sure to be aware of your reaction to things. And if there's a problem, seek guidance. That doesn't mean you have to pay anyone. Go to United Policyholders. Call firms that specialize in this area of practice. Speak with public adjusters. Many people, and I think the folks who practice in this area who are really dedicated to assisting consumers, are first interested in providing advice and maybe down the road interested in taking money. Start with your policy. As Michael described, get the full policy, get the declaration pages, review it, and if you have questions about your rights under your policy, ask an expert. So let me just step back and tell you a little bit about me. I work, my partner is Edward Kerley. We're in Oakland, California. We do work all around California, including very commonly in the Los Angeles area. And we are narrowly focused on representing consumers in disputes with their insurance carriers. We have been for more than 15 years, and we have, unlike perhaps some of the firms that you've seen advertising in the Los Angeles area, we have primarily been assisting consumers in answering questions. I agree with Michael. It's likely that many of you will not need paid professional help. Now, if you're somebody who just wants to pay for the help, fair enough. There's plenty of people who are going to be offering that guidance. But most of you are not going to require it. You don't need to pay anybody. You need to understand your rights, and you need to stick to your rights along the way. But many of you, or most of you, I think, will be able to get to the finish line without paid professional help. And my firm so far has been primarily or really exclusively engaged in just simply answering questions, helping people kind of answer those first few critical questions about what their rights are, what their coverages are, and not assuming that disputes are going to arise and being retained by folks. So we continue to play that role. I obviously can't respond to every email or every phone call, and have received hundreds over the last couple of weeks, but we are expert in this area, and we're here to help. So building on what Michael said, we basically have two categories, two tranches of types of losses here, roughly. One are situations in which folks have lost their homes, and we call that a total loss. Burned to the ground, nothing left. And obviously that is an extraordinary tragedy for you folks who have suffered that. And in some ways, that makes life simple. Because of the nature of the loss, it's very challenging for the carriers in those situations to cut corners. And the other category are folks whose houses didn't burn to the ground. And that may mean they suffered some level of, I'll just describe it as fire damage, meaning burning and melting, charring, and then other types of damage, which we'll talk about, which are much more challenging to prove and often pose or create disputes with the carriers. We created what I'll just describe briefly or simply as a cheat sheet, which is in the chat and has our firm name on it, and is a list of basic rights that are afforded in this state to insurance consumers. Here's the good news. You live in a state in which over the last 40 or 50 years, the legislature has afforded property insurance consumers a wide variety of rights. Not true in all states. And while the situation in California is challenging, as you've read in the newspaper and seen on the news, and while it's not perfect, it's very good. And it means that there are a whole slew of rights and regulations that apply to property losses. The highest level items are listed in our cheat sheet, and I would encourage you to look at that. And again, building on what Michael said, a lot of that is taken from the United Policyholders website. There are links to various parts of that website. I would strongly encourage everybody, no matter what your situation is, to go to United Policyholders and just spend some time poking around. There's extraordinary resources there. They've built quite a database of materials, of links, of templates and samples that you can use as your claim goes forward. Michael, I am prepared to proceed with answering questions and addressing particular items. I can see that folks have already asked a few questions in the chat. So do you want to proceed that way?
Yeah, let's do it, Dylan.
Okay.
We're shifting hosts here, and I'm trying to get my video function back on. There we go.
So someone said, how do we find the cheat sheet?
I'll drop those back in so you can focus on the questions, but I'll relink all of the documents that I had put when we initially started to the chat, so those who joined a little later can access those. But for everyone who has questions, if you can drop them in the chat, we might be able to enable video and audio here for everyone if you prefer to do it that way. But we'll start with the written questions. This is from Paul. The box next to B, other structures, is not checked on my CFP policy. If my home is still standing and I understand you correctly, can I use coverage from coverage A to pay for repairing, cleaning, resurfacing the pool, etc.? Correct.
Yeah. So in the FAIR plan, so couple of higher level points, and then I'll address the specifics. California FAIR Plan is an odd bird as insurance carriers go, and there's a lot that I can say about that, and I'm happy to answer any and all questions about California FAIR Plan. What I can say is that there's really two worlds of insurance in California. One is the standard all-risk retail policy that many of you have: Allstate, USAA, Liberty Mutual, State Farm, Nationwide, and maybe some smaller carriers, AAA. That's one category. And then we have the FAIR Plan policy, and it's just different in many respects. I know that the areas that were impacted by these fires were heavily exposed to California FAIR Plan. So I do want to make sure we address those. But unfortunately, the rules that apply to FAIR Plan or the aspects of the policy that are relevant and that this person asked about are not going to apply to other carriers. So the specific answer is, under the FAIR Plan policy, to the extent that there is no identified, specified coverage limit for other structures, and just so we're clear, other structures typically are defined, and they're typically defined in the policy, but in the FAIR Plan policy, we're talking about parts of your property that are not attached to the house, and that will include irrigation lines, fences, sheds, guest cottages, pools, septic systems, etc. Anything that isn't the dwelling. So if you didn't pay for any specified coverage limit, the FAIR Plan policy allows you to use up to 10% of the A limit, that's that A bucket that Michael described, to address damage to other structures. And that will reduce your limits on your A coverage. So if you've got $1 million in A coverage, you can use $100,000 of that, but that will take it down to a $900,000 limit. Michael, you're muted at the moment.
All right, let's go back to the chat. I know there are a lot of other questions. I'm trying to upload some documents here. We'll take some of these in order. Would FAIR Plan give me, this from Manny, would FAIR Plan give me the money and timeline to remediate, or will they pay the remediation company themselves?
The question of what FAIR Plan will do and won't do is an open question. What I can say is what FAIR Plan has done historically, which has resulted in multiple lawsuits and Department of Insurance investigations and various other dramas over the past 10 years. Here's what I can tell you. California FAIR Plan takes the position and has done historically. I cannot tell you what they're going to do in your loss, because every loss is a new loss. They have taken the position historically that damage from a wildfire that results from intrusion of fire debris. I don't like to use the word smoke because smoke goes away. What we're talking about is damage left over from smoke, and I like to refer to that as fire debris. So FAIR Plan takes the position that damage from fire debris is not covered under your policy. Now, This is a very complicated question and probably beyond the scope of our conversation today. What I can say is that in the specific answer to your question is the likely scenario for most folks whose houses were not fire damaged, meaning damaged by heat, melting, or burning, is that Fair Plan will send out a independent adjuster, typically somebody from out of state who comes in to adjust catastrophic losses. We call those CAT adjusters. And that person will spend a relatively small amount of time in your home, and that person will write an estimate for repairs. That estimate typically, and again, this will range widely based on the nature of the loss to your home. Typically, it involves use of hydroxyl, which is a purported deodorizing process using oxidizing agents, and the remediation estimate may include removal of insulation from your attic, because that often is just horribly impacted by wildfire debris. Typically, historically, that is all Fair Plan has paid. So if you have a USA policy and your house is damaged by fire debris, the likelihood is that USA is going to cover the cost of what you're describing as remediation, which is to say a professional remediation of your home for fire debris. That can include, if necessary, demolition of certain kinds of building components, but typically involves just a very, very good and professional cleaning. Fair Plan, again, historically, has chosen not to cover those kinds of costs. So that is a long and roundabout answer to your question, but the answer is likely they're going to pay you nothing. If they do choose to pay for any kind of remediation, they're obligated to pay you directly for that cost and not any vendor that they hire. It's your money. You get to do with it what you want. They'll measure the damage, they'll measure the cost, and they'll pay you the money. And then you could use that to pay your contractor or a remediation vendor or some other expert. But, and this is a big but, and it could affect thousands of people in this claim. It has affected thousands of consumers in California since 2012. Fair Plan historically has not paid anything for remediation.
And this is a good segue, Dylan, into the next several questions. The next one is from Jeff, and he was asking, can you provide an update on the class action lawsuit that you apparently filed in July of 2024 regarding the amendments that seem to restrict the coverage for smoke damage, et cetera, to the visible eye, sensed by the nose, et cetera?
So this is a long and complicated story, and I don't know that it's worth getting too far into the weeds on it, but I appreciate the question, and my firm has been spearheading a decade-long fight on this issue, which is ultimately about health and safety. I mean, the damage that's caused by wildfires to homes that aren't burned to the ground results in very serious damage, and Fair Plan's practices are illegal and have resulted in thousands of denied claims. The short answer is the litigation is ongoing. The good news, I think, is that the Department of Insurance, after a long investigation, concluded that the Fair Plan policy is illegal. Unfortunately, for reasons that are way beyond my pay grade, the regulator, Commissioner Lara, has chosen to sort of sit on his hands on the issue after finding that the policy is illegal. He kind of didn't do much to enforce it and has left it up to lawyers to enforce those findings. So we're pursuing the class case in Alameda County, which is called Arteno versus Fair Plan. We're pursuing a separate litigation in Los Angeles, which seeks relief on behalf of thousands of California Fair Plan customers whose wildfire claims, were denied in reliance on these policy provisions. My belief and my hope is that in the next 12 months, we will get that across the finish line, and we will ultimately invalidate those provisions and stop Fair Plan from continuing this conduct. The problem for the folks on this Zoom and for thousands of others is that that may not impact the claims handling for these losses. And if I had to predict, my prediction is that Fair Plan would generally deny the claims for remediation.
Blake asked if you have more of a smoke-oriented claim, and I know, Dylan, you don't like that word because we're still talking about fire damage, but if you have a smoke-oriented claim and it's going to be an itemized debate, is legal support advisable?
First of all, it depends on the carrier. So if we're talking about Fair Plan, my suggestion is simple. Simple but hard to execute. Suggestion is to allow Fair Plan to do its investigation. It will, as I said, it will send out a independent adjuster who's not really independent but works for Fair Plan. They will do their thing and they will send you a check. Relatively small amount of money, likely. At that point, the question is, are you up for a dispute? Are you up for a fight? And if you are, and I would encourage you to be, really you need two things. You need decent testing from a licensed hygienist to determine the scope of damage to your house. And you need a contractor to follow on in terms of what that's going to cost to repair. The hygienist can also give you a sense of the scope of damage to your personal property. So you're basically talking about what is wrong with your house and what is wrong with your contents. And in order to find out what's wrong with your house and what's wrong with your contents, you need to have an expert do an investigation. Fair Plan, again, historically has not undertaken those sorts of costs. They don't typically hire hygienists and don't typically hire contractors. They rely on these independent adjusters who are, typically quite unqualified to really be determining the scope of damage to these types of losses, meaning losses that involve infiltration of fire debris, contamination, and that sort of thing. So my suggestion is see what they do if it's Fair Plan. The other carriers have been better, not perfect. They also maybe not sending out hygienists, but they will typically pay for a very, very solid remediation. So I would insist on that. If it's USAA or Liberty Mutual or State Farm, carriers like that, I would be asking them for hygienist testing. They may agree or not. I would be asking them for a full remediation and sort of see where you end up. If you end up with a pretty decent amount of benefits and you can get the work done for that kind of money, then you don't need to have the dispute. If it's Fair Plan and your claim is essentially denied, I mean, they will pay you a small amount of money, but not enough to really do any kind of meaningful repairs, then you will need to pursue the testing to create sort of evidence as relates to the scope of damage. You will need to have a contractor look at your house and give you a solid estimate. And then after that, you need to find counsel, because this is a dispute that, as I said, we've been litigating for 10 years and likely are going to have to continue. My firm, as I said earlier, we're not really accepting retentions at the moment in terms of that dispute because we don't think it's ripe. I have plenty of lawsuits on it already. I'm prepared to pursue it in these fires, but not yet. We need to kind of see where Fair Plan ends up, see what happens, and then a few months from now we'll probably have a long list of folks who have been denied, their claims have been denied, and then we'll be in a position to pursue that on behalf of folks in your area. And there are other firms will do that as well. I don't think any firm will be doing it as well as we are, because we've been doing it for 10 years, but there's plenty of excellent lawyers in California who will be pursuing those issues.
Dylan, then, excuse me. The next question is, do we need to get pre-authorization from Fair Plan to do soil testing and debris removal?
Oh, yes.
So the answer is you don't need pre-approval from an insurance company to do anything. But that doesn't mean you're going to get paid to do it. So, if you have the resources to hire a licensed hygienist to do soils testing, to do, typically the soils themselves are not covered, but the stuff that's in the soils can end up in your house. So you do want to test the house. You do want to test the immediate area if you have the resources to do it. And the issue is whether Fair Plan is going to pay you or your carrier is going to pay you to do that. And the answer is typically not, especially in the case of Fair Plan. But the policy doesn't require you to seek pre-approval for anything. But that is with the caveat that the carrier may or may not decide to pay you for the money that you've invested. So it's often useful to have that conversation with the carrier to at least understand what they're agreeing to and what they're not agreeing to.
Susan asks, how do I prove what I owned? I've been there for 41 years, but I don't have pictures.
Okay, so that's an excellent question. And on our cheat sheet, I described the rights of consumers in California with regard to contents losses. So again, two categories. Category where everything's gone. And in California, if everything's gone, meaning your house is a total loss and your contents are a total loss, the carrier is obligated to give you 1/3 of your contents limit. So let's say your limit is $1 million. They're obligated immediately to pay you 1/3 of your contents limit up to the limit of $250,000. Now, my recommendation for everyone is to write an email or a letter to your carrier. Again, there's a link on the cheat sheet to some good language, and essentially to ask the carrier to pay the whole limit. Let's say your limit's $1 million. The carriers range in terms of their sort of how much above the mandatory 250 they'll go, but many of them are getting as high as 75 or 80%. I know USAA is at 80%. So they will pay you at a minimum $250,000, 1/3 of your limit up to $250,000. But many of the carriers will pay very, very substantially more. I see somebody in the chat said they've given me 75% of the limit. Okay, so if you want to go from 75% to 100%, then you will need to create a contents inventory. That can be immensely time-consuming, traumatic, and challenging. And I don't have a solution for you other than there's very good resources at United Policyholders for sort of creating inventories. But it's a very big challenge. The reason for the mandatory minimum is because the regulator and the legislature concluded exactly as we all have, which is making contents inventories is next to impossible. So you paid for your limit, and they really should be paying you a very substantial piece of that limit. Now, if your house is not a total loss, then there is no requirement that they pay you anything without an inventory. So in that case, you are going to have to create an inventory. In that case, the stuff is there, so presumably you're going to be able to do that with more ease. And if you have a Fair Plan policy, they're not going to pay you for anything because their position is contents are not damaged by fire debris. They can be cleaned, and if something can be cleaned, it hasn't suffered a loss. Now, my firm's view and my view and the view of, I think, experts is that that's nonsense and that fire debris can be devastating to contents and can render very substantial portions of it non-salvageable. That certainly includes upholstered furniture, mattresses, carpeting, draperies, clothing that's in any way complicated to clean. Maybe the silverware and the glass table can be cleaned, but many of the homes that are impacted by fire debris are going to suffer from very substantial losses to contents. But I don't want to be Pollyannish. If it's Fair Plan and possibly the other carriers, you are going to face a battle on that. So I encourage everybody to get good hygienist input, do some testing, and make the claim and kind of see where things land.
This is a more general question, but Blake was asking if you hire or engage a legal representative, can you revert back to a direct relationship or communication with your insurance company?
Absolutely. So you're entitled to, if you send your carrier a letter of representation, whether it's from a public adjuster or a lawyer, they're going to talk to the PA or the lawyer until you tell them not to. But at any point, you can change that relationship and go back to communicating directly. As I've said, I would encourage you to do your best without paying a whole lot of money to public adjusters and lawyers until you feel like you need the help. And that may be with Fair Plan, that may be right away. With other carriers, maybe not. But I've had calls with, I don't know, 25 to 50 people over the last couple of weeks. And I've gotten responses back from a very substantial number of them have said, yeah, I spoke with my carrier. They're sending me my A limit. They're sending me my contents minimum. I'm in a rental. Now I have to decide whether to rebuild or buy elsewhere. But we're moving forward. My expectation is that the more challenging claims are going to be the non-total losses. So I would encourage you to go as far as you can, and then again, using your the same resources that got you where you are today, make a decision about representation, and then be very careful. There's excellent public adjusters in California, and there's excellent lawyers in California who do this work. And as I'm sure you know from your own experiences in life, there's also folks who are going to try to cash in on the immense tragedy that you've been through, and we need to be careful.
Matthew asks, we have extended replacement cost coverage and we'd like an advance on it. The insurance company says they only pay that out when we start rebuilding. Is there any way to get an insurance company to give the advance, hopefully the whole amount now instead of waiting a year or more?
Short answer is no. The coverages, it's very, very difficult for an insurance lawyer who's careful, as I am, to offer specific advice in any circumstance without seeing the policy, because the policies vary broadly. I can say, not the Fair Plan policy. The Fair Plan policy is a template, but State Farm and Nationwide and Liberty Mutual, they offer a variety of types of coverages, and you really want to look at the details. Generally speaking, the A coverage is assuming you have a total loss or a very substantial loss. The A coverage is what they owe you right up front. The extended replacement coverage, the coverage for building code upgrades, and tranches of coverage that are sort of not within the A bucket typically are required to be incurred, which is to say, when you start repairs and you start exceeding those limits, they start paying those benefits. Now, one right that you have, which the carriers they don't like, and they often don't tell you about, is that in total loss situations, and this is detailed in the cheat sheet, in total loss situations, you have the right to simply go out and replace your house. Now, obviously, for many families, it's just not possible. It's a complicated and expensive process. But if you have, I'm just going to say $1 million in coverage and another $250 in extended replacement benefits, and so your total benefits are, say, $1.2 million, and you go out and you buy a house tomorrow for $1.5 million, all of those benefits are due. So it's sort of like a very quick route to obtaining all of the benefits under your policy: A limits, B limits, debris removal, code upgrades, extended. All of those fall into that category I'll call the replacement benefits wallet. If you go out and you buy a house tomorrow, assuming your house, the replacement cost exceeds your limits, they're going to owe you all that money right up front. But if you're choosing to repair your house, to replace it on site, then in most policies, in order to obtain those benefits, in addition to or on top of the A limit, typically those have to be incurred. And most carriers are not going to require you to write the check, but you have to be kind of into repairs and ask for them along the way. Once you've signed a building contract, assuming it exceeds your limits, they should be willing to start coughing up that money.
Deborah had a question about a rental property. They rented out a Palisades house and they're curious about rental loss income. And secondly, if Part D, the fair rental value, has any relevance to her.
Absolutely. So the fair plan policy is not a loss of use policy. It's as Michael described, it's a fair rental value policy. And it really shouldn't matter if the house is uninhabitable or gone. It shouldn't matter what you do. They shouldn't be asking you questions about, are you staying with your mom or are you spending money? It's a value policy. So they just measure the value, and they should be paying you according to the quirky terms of the policy, which carves up your limit into 12 and then pays you that 1/12 per month up to the fair rental value. One thing Michael said, which I don't agree with, and that happens from time to time among lawyers. So I'll just make sure you have my point of view. The fair rental value is not measured the day before the loss. The fair rental value should be measured the day after the loss. And as you know, I mean, from my view, and as you know, the rental values in Los Angeles have gone through the roof lately. So when you're having that conversation with Fair Plan, you really should be asking them, well, show me some comparables, and what is the real rental value of my house, especially a furnished property.
Can I quickly intervene? I think I didn't write it clearly. We have been renting out the house. We don't live there because we moved to another state. And is there coverage for our loss of rental income?
Absolutely. So non-fair plan policies, rental, landlord policies, we call them, almost always have some kind of rental business income interruption coverage. But if we're talking about the fair plan policy, 100% covered. In the same way that the person who lives there loses the value of that property for the period that it's uninhabitable. Same thing for the rental, and it doesn't depend on what you are actually renting it for. It depends on the rental value, which is maybe not the same thing. Maybe you were getting more than the value. Maybe you were getting less. Most likely, you were getting less. So you're absolutely covered for the fair rental value for the period that the house is uninhabitable, and it should not make a difference what the actual rent was. Now, I've seen at Fair Plan the adjusters ask folks for lease agreements and so forth, and you can provide those things, but you should be insisting on what the policy says, which is rental value. I hope that answered the question. I tried.
Yes,
No,
thank you.
I apologize. Yes, thank you, Dylan, and thank you for correcting me or clarifying. I think I misspoke, but I would agree with you on the fair rental value.
Let me be clear, Michael. Fair Plan agrees with you. I mean, Fair Plan has, I think, cheated people for a very, very long time, and this is an issue that will likely be litigating in the next year. Fair Plan's position is it goes on Zillow, which is historic pricing, and it says this is what we owe you. And first of all, they shouldn't be relying on Zillow because Zillow is a wildly imperfect measure. But more importantly, the policy is intended to cover loss of use. And it doesn't make sense to measure the value the day before the loss because, of course, the loss of use is not before the loss, it's after the loss. So I think we're going to win that issue, but Fair Plan has historically paid based on Zillow, which is historic pricing.
Dylan, the next question is from Christoph. He was asking, is it okay to push the insurance to get a full monetary estimate and a payout as soon as possible to move on and buy somewhere else? If yes, what is the typical timeline? I think you partially addressed that in a previous answer.
Yeah, so the process is, I mean, I like to talk about the replacement benefits wallet, and maybe it's hokey, but it's kind of a conceptual, it's a useful concept for me. So the replacement benefits wallet contains a variety of things based on the coverages in your policy. It contains the A limit. It contains the other structures limit. And it contains those other limits. The question is whether you can reach into the wallet and grab the money. So the first thing the carrier has to do is figure out what's in the wallet. And the way they do that, if they do it competently, is they bring out a contractor or hopefully a good estimator, and they figure out what it's going to cost you to replace your house without reference to depreciation. And that's the term or the phrase that Michael used, replacement cost. A replacement cost is the estimated value to replace your house without applying any depreciation. So I have a 3,000 square foot house. If I'm honest, the pricing in LA is going to be $800, $900, maybe $1,000 a square foot. You do the math. That creates the wallet. Once they've created that estimate for what it's going to cost to replace that house, then your choices about what you do with the money in that wallet are your choices. You can take that money and buy another house. You can take that money and repair your house or replace your house. But as I said earlier, the process of getting the money out of the wallet into your bank account is more complicated if you're repairing, because some of those benefits are required to be incurred. So timelines, I have no insight into that. What I can say is that they're supposed to move expeditiously. The obligation to investigate the scope of loss and the cost to repair your house or replace your house is entirely the carrier's. You're under no obligation to do anything. You're supposed to, of course, cooperate, provide photographs, provide any documents you have about what the house looked like, or if you had done remodeling, plans, permits, those sorts of things. These are itemized on our cheat sheet. So do your best to help them help you, but in the end, it's their obligation. How fast they're going to get those done, I mean, to be fair to the carriers, this is a big event, and they're all slammed. Fair plan will be unless again a miracle happens and history is no indication. Fair plan will be lagging all of the carriers by a very significant margin.
Dylan, the next question is, we have been evacuated from our home and cannot return. We know the house didn't burn. I'm assuming, burn at least completely to the ground, but there seems to be smoke damage. Please keep in mind we cannot access the home because of the mandatory evacuation in Malibu, and therefore we cannot take pictures of the damage. How can we access? Sorry, let me scroll down. How can we access the loss of use coverage?
Well, if you have no access to your house, whoever your carrier is, they should be paying for loss of use. That shouldn't be a dispute. If it's fair plan, they should be paying fair rental value. If it's other carriers, typically it's measured by either rental value, but very much more commonly, we refer to additional living expenses, which is essentially money that you're spending that you weren't spending earlier. So, if you're going out and you're renting a house, that's the measure of the loss. So the lack of access to your house makes it simple. Now, once the access is provided, and assuming there's water and electric to your house, which that can be a challenge in these communities because sometimes the water systems are impacted. Let's say you're talking about a house that's really just standing, got electric, it's got water, you've got access, and that the house has been profoundly impacted by fire debris. Then you maybe have a fight. So fair plan's position historically again is we're not paying you any more loss of use after the emergency evacuation is concluded. They will pay you for that period, and that's it. In my view, that is borders on criminal because these houses, at least until they've been tested, cannot be confirmed to be safe. The other carriers usually will pay for a period of loss of use while they do their investigation. They determine the scope of damage, and then they pay you for repairs, and they give you a reasonable period of time to accomplish those repairs. So you should be in a position where you can demand the loss of use benefits for that period. The investigation, resolution about how much benefits you owed, and then a reasonable period to get folks in there to repair your house, which under the circumstances there may be substantial delays. If it's fair plan, again, unless they do something very differently in this situation than they've done historically, they're going to cut off people's loss of use pretty much right away after the emergency evacuation ends and you've got access. And what I encourage you to do is demand the continuing fair rental value. Tell them your house is unsafe. Tell them or at least you don't know whether it's safe. And move as quickly as you can to develop that evidence that I described earlier from a hygienist and a contractor. Provide that to fair plan, and then we'll see what happens. In many cases, if history is any indication, that's going to be the end of the dispute. I mean, that is where they'll leave it, and then it's a question of retaining good lawyers and fighting them. I want to make absolutely sure everybody hears me loud and clear. Lawsuits are not for everyone, and just these sorts of disputes are themselves long, traumatic, and very, very difficult. We will be handling those lawsuits, as will other good firms in this state. But it's a long and difficult battle, and I would encourage everybody to do their absolute best to avoid it. And if it's unavoidable, well, then we cross that bridge when we get to it.
Real quick, just to clarify before we move on to the next question, what type of claim should we submit? Because we don't know, we don't have access to the home. So we don't know if it's smoke or...
There's a bit of a misunderstanding in California, and I very rarely use the word claim. I may have used it in this Zoom, but if I did, I apologize. If you look at your insurance policy, you will find that the word claim, and this is true of every insurance policy, the word claim is not in there. Your obligation under your policy, and the policy is a contract. You paid premiums, your carrier made you a promise. You made a contract, and the contract requires you to notify the carrier of the loss. And that means notify your agent or notify the carrier directly. In most cases, the carrier is going to be aware of your loss because it understands where you live, but you're obligated to notify the carrier of a loss. And this goes directly to your question, and it's an excellent question because it's really a substantial misunderstanding. You have no obligation to identify the damage. You have no obligation to be an expert. You have no obligation to do an investigation. Your obligation under the contract is to notify your carrier of the existence of a loss. Something is broken at my house. I don't know what it is. I'm asking you to find out. The carrier has an obligation under California regulations to conduct a thorough, objective, and fair investigation of the scope of damage and the cost of repair and the benefits due under your policy. So the answer to your question is, I wouldn't worry about that. I would notify your carrier and say, my house suffered damage due to the wildfire. Please inspect my house and tell me how much, what's the scope of damage, meaning the extent of damage, and what you're going to cover, what you're not going to cover. And once you understand the carrier's view of the scope of damage, well, especially in the fair plan case, you may have to, if you want to enforce your rights, you may have to undertake your own investigation in the way I've described. Hey, Michael, this might be a good time to hear from Dawn. Are we able to kind of put her up on the screen? I don't know if...
Yes, let me make her the host, and she should be able to share.
Am I going to be able to talk with her or not?
Yes.
Okay,
yes.
good.
Dawn, do we have Dawn live?
Can you see me? Can you hear me?
Hear but not see.
It says my video is on. I don't know why I'm not coming up. I've got my camera turned on.
Michael, while we try to...
Dawn, we're gonna fix the video.
Okay.
While we address the technical issue, let me explain who Dawn is and what she's doing here. So when I first faced the challenge with California Fair Plan, I went in search of, instead of trying to find a litigation expert or a person who wanted, was interested in helping out in lawsuits, I went and found a scientist. And Dawn Bolstad-Johnson and her company Kaizen Safety Solutions is one of the leading experts in the United States, in my opinion, on the issues that arise from wildfire damage, which put into the category of fire debris, meaning contamination and impact on homes from smoke and other wildfire contaminants. Dawn has been working with my firm and with insureds around the United States, and as well as with governmental organizations. And she's been investigating the question of what happens to homes when they're impacted by fire debris, and how do you find it? So what do you do to search for it? What is the scope of the damage? And then, of course, what are the right and safe solutions for remediating and fixing these homes? So I asked her to join me to talk a little bit about those issues, kind of what she's seen, and give some guidance to folks. As I said earlier, it's very important, especially in the fair plan context, in the case of homes that are not burned to the ground, but have substantial fire debris damage, even if partially burned. The smoke damage claims are, you know, as I said, can be very challenging. So we're going to want to encourage you to obtain a good testing from a licensed hygienist who has experience in this area. And I'm hoping that when we get Dawn's video going, we can talk about what that might consist of.
Hey, Dawn,
think
I'm tech support over here helping Michael. If you can make him the host again, we've got it figured out. I just can tweak a setting, but he just needs to be made the host. He had made you the host. If you know how to do that, it's just if you can click his name and say make host, his alphabetical Michael Karikomi.
Okay.
Thanks, Don. Sorry about that technical glitch.
Looks like Michael's the host again.
All right, Don, take it away.
My video thing says it's on. It says that I'm unable to start my video because the host has stopped it. So I can't, my permission to turn on the video is canceled. But I think the audio is working if you want me to kind of walk through.
Yeah, Michael, why don't we, since we're probably, you know, folks are anxious to move forward, you want to just, let me just have a conversation with Dawn about these issues? Is that?
Yeah, we're just gonna switch the host function back to her so she can.
Yeah, you should be able to turn your video on now, Dawn.
Okay. My video is unchecked.
We can see you.
We see you and hear you.
You can see me?
Yep.
Okay.
I'm not seeing her, Michael, but there's a
Oh.
lot of folks on. Michael, let's just go forward because I'm concerned about losing folks. Oh, I guess other people can see her, so very good.
I can't see her, but it's okay.
Maybe it's a different page. I think you have to maybe pin. Oh yeah,
Yeah,
I see myself.
yeah.
You have to go to page 2. I'm on page 2, I think.
Yeah. Dawn, let me just are you able to hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Great. So let me just so the first question that I would ask is can you give folks an idea of kind of what they should be looking at when they go back to their houses and they're concerned about, you know, these issues, fire debris and contamination? Just give us a sense of what, based on your vast experience, what they should be looking for.
Okay. So when you first go back into your home, you're probably going to see a lot of soot, char, and ash around windows and door frames. And that's kind of the pathway that this stuff is going to come in, the obvious pathway. But it's also going to come in through your roof, through your dryer vent, any penetration that you have to the outside, because the smoke is coming into your home from the outside. The smoke damage or the fire damage occurs in 3 ways. You have thermal damage, which can be your house could be in a heat envelope. So you may see melted things like melted reflector lights if you have them on your garage, or melted sprinkler lines, or melted Malibu lights, or whatever you have. That's thermal damage. So that's an indicator of how hot it was around your fire, around your home. Then you have non-thermal damage, which will be your chemical or your particulate damage. So be your soot, char, and ash. We measure for suspended particulate. We look for chloride anions that could damage your electronics. And then we look for chemical contamination, which is gas and vapor, which you may not be able to see with the naked eye, but when you get into your house and you're there for a few minutes, you may feel a scratchy throat. Your nose might start to bleed. Your nose could dry out. You could smell some really nasty stuff. That's indicators that the gas and vapor is still in your house from the fire emissions, because everything that burned went into that plume of smoke, and the smoke is a transport vehicle that now brought that contamination into your home. So we're finding that drywall is contaminated. We test it to prove it with lab analysis. So we kind of do way more than the average Joe, but I think the role of the hygienist, whoever you decide to hire, if you decide to go that route, should be able to identify where the damage is. Insurance companies, when they send their hygienists out, they don't sample on HVAC, and they'll sample on the vertical to try to get a low number. So they'll sample on the vertical wall instead of a horizontal surface to try to show that your damage isn't that bad. So they're biasing the results by their instructions to the hygienist that they hire. So they don't do attics, they don't do wall cavities. Those are all areas that you should look for. I would recommend that if you're going into your home, you should have some level of respiratory protection. N95s don't always work because they don't protect against gas and vapor. So you need gas and vapor cartridge. And sometimes those are, we use them when we go into homes, and they're kind of becoming hard to find because Amazon is like currently sold out. So, but you can get cartridges from Grainger and respirators that will protect you while you go in. As far as clothes and belongings, if you're trying to grab something, I would leave all that behind until you get your house tested and figure out how much damage is there. Because if you're putting clothing on your skin, everything that's in your shirt or in your jacket or in your undergarments is going to absorb into your skin. So right now, I would just treat everything as contaminated until you understand where the fire damage is and the extent of the damage. Things you can salvage right now are anything that's metal or anything that's glass.
Facciamo organizzare.
So
No, go on.
So?
If everybody could just mute themselves, that would be great.
I see, but
Go on, Don.
So,
Yeah.
I mean, that's just like kind of a general rule of thumb, but when you go in, sometimes it may not look that bad. It may look like there's a little debris around your
yes.
windows or your door, and the contamination can be much more than what you see with the visible, what you see optically. What the insurance company wants to solve is just what you can see optically.
Because
That's
извини, пожалуйста, я еще слушаю кое-что.
Michael, can you just mute everybody
Ye-
automatically?
Not without Don retransferring the
Okay.
host function to me.
Yeah. We'll try to make it through.
yeah. So anyway,
Don,
it's-
let me ask you a related question. So one of the questions that I've had after giving the advice I gave earlier, which is especially as relates to the fair plan claims to obtain testing when you're able to get back in, and can you give us a sense of sort of what are the questions that you'd be asking the various people who are offering their services for hygienists? I mean, it'd be great if you could test every house in Los Angeles, but that seems unlikely. I would be very happy if that were the case, but you're one person. So what are the kind of the top, things to be making sure that folks ask hygienists who they are thinking about retaining?
So the number one, I would ask what their experience is in sampling post-fire environments. A lot of people are going to be calling indoor air quality specialists because they have an indoor air quality problem. That's what the consumer thinks. And the indoor air quality specialists are really only trained in mold. They've gone to a 40-hour class. A lot of them don't have college degrees in chemistry and toxicology. And then they're not turning down the call. They'll call their lab and say, I got a fire case. What do I sample for? And the lab will say, oh, well, we can help you out. Just do char and ash and do some tape lifts and send it in. So I would ask their experience. I would ask for a sample of one of their recent reports so you can see what you're getting. And ask if they sample in wall cavities. You have to cut in the wall to get to the wall cavity. There's no magic way to get in there. I would ask if they're sampling building materials for chemical contamination, like cyanide and drywall. That's kind of a mic drop moment for me, because if you've got contamination in your drywall, then it's in your couch, it's in your chair, it's in your carpet, it's in everything. So I would ask how they're doing the evaluation, if they're doing any anion testing, because the chloride anions are oxidizers, and what they attack is your electronic boards in your computer, in your washer and dryer. There's a protective coating on the electronic boards, and the fire smoke is is corrosive and it will etch that electronic board. And then one day your refrigerator just doesn't work anymore, or your washer and dryer don't work. And there's no reason. It didn't fail slowly, it failed fast. So we sampled for chloride anions to see what the chloride, that's from plastics burning. So all that's in the fire smoke that came into your house. And we're looking for the residue to assess the extent of the fire damage. So I would ask your consultant, do you know about chloride anion testing? And then what is their approach? How do they sample? How long do they spend at your house? We spend 10 to 12 hours at a house. We're looking in every nook and cranny. We do a lot of direct read instrumentation. If they're bringing a PID, a photoionization detector, that will not see most of the common fire emissions. Early in the chat, I put a reference to the National Academies of Sciences. It's the Chemistry of Fires at the Wildland Urban Interface, and it's a free download. I recommend that all of you download it and read it so you can understand the common emissions that happen when a structure burns, when a car burns. Those are the things that the consultant should be sampling for in your house. And if they're doing wildfire indicators, secondary and primary, that's the wrong test. And so I've seen that a lot in legal cases. People don't really know what they're doing. They're following the lab's lead. They're not qualified to do this work. I'm a bit of a unicorn because I spent 19 years studying firefighter exposures and overhaul, and I was the first to publish before there was ever a cancer epidemic in the fire service. So I think the homeowners have the same exposure. How could you not have a different exposure from the firefighters? The difference is you don't get to leave the fire scene, and the firefighters put out the fire and they go back home. So I think it's a very complex toxic soup. And if you have better understanding of what was burned and how many homes in your neighbor's house, this document that I put in the chat, it even has discussion about spatial and temporal. So if you're, a couple blocks away, you can have just as big of an impact as if you were next door to the houses that burned. So the winds were strong. It's going to blow that stuff in everywhere. And again, your house kind of becomes a staged filter. So there'll be different concentrations, maybe in different layers of your house. We've lifted up boards, exterior siding boards, and found heavy debris in the fires in Colorado. So it's coming from the outside in. Just because you see a little bit, that's why we sampled for suspended particulate, because that's what you're breathing in. You can't see it with the naked eye. It's airborne, floating around. And in some cases, the suspended particulate has been 200 times higher inside the house than in outside air. Mother Nature does a great job with dilution ventilation, but those particles get trapped. They're in your HVAC system. The HVAC system is like the Audubon for particles to go everywhere in your house. And it's interesting to me that insurance company hygienists do not sample HVAC systems at all. So understand how smoke travels, and some of these, like that document I put in there, will give you a working knowledge, and you probably have more knowledge than some of the consultants you may be talking to. But ask for a sample report and talk to a couple different ones and see, if they're not giving you a sample report, you can redact they can redact one of the reports and give you a gist of what they're looking for, how they report it, how they interpret the results, all of that. So you can get a feel real quick if they're qualified or not.
Don, can I ask, this is Michael Karikomi. I'm still off video, but can I ask a couple of questions that various forms have been asked in the chat and getting some thumbs up? So I think a lot of people are wondering the same thing in terms of timing. This question, as it's phrased, is for the home still standing. Does it make sense to do the testing now or wait until the debris of other burnt homes around has been removed? There's also similar questions about, when is the appropriate time to bring in a hygienist, somebody to do your own independent testing?
So I have sampled at all phases. I've been the first in, and I've been the last one in 7 years after the fire. I get called to fix it after it's been screwed up by a bunch of other people. And then I've also been the first in, and then my reports get challenged because they're considered to be excessive by the insurance companies. But I would say you'd want to go in before they start removing debris, because the insurance company can turn that around on you and say, well, your house How do you know it wasn't contaminated from all the debris removal if you're in close proximity to burn homes? I've seen that in deposition questions on me. Well, how do you know it's not from the debris removal kind of thing? So I would say it would behoove you. Also, the concentrations of chemicals are going to probably be at their highest because chemicals will off gas and they're going to decay over time. That doesn't mean the damage is gone, but it means the signal is weaker. So when I sample 1 month after the fire, the signal is going to be stronger than if I sample 2 years after the fire. I still find the fire damage. I'm like, I have high grade instrumentation and I understand where the fire smoke goes and we find it. But it's so sooner is better, before the debris removal is better. Like Dylan said, sometimes you don't need it. It depends on your carrier. I've talked to people that said, oh, my carrier's being great, they're very helpful. And I said, well, that's not what I see, but good for you. And I tell them what I see. And then we march forward, and 6 months down the road, they're like, you're scary right. Everything you said is what happened to me, because the insurance companies will act like your best friend, and then they'll delay and deny, and you'll change carrier or adjusters a million times. You have to tell your story a million times over, and they try to just wear you down. So like Dylan said, it's not for everybody. It's a fight. It's a marathon. It's not a sprint. But I think the most important thing on smoke damage claims from my perspective is understanding where the damage is so that you can remove the damage. Washing a drywall or wiping it with their chemical sponge does not remove the cyanide that's now chemically bonded into your drywall. So cleaning does not reverse fire damage. Cleaning removes optical debris that you can see. It doesn't reverse the fire damage. So if you've got melted anything, melted reflectors, melted things, that's an indicator of thermal damage. And you could have more damage in the wall cavity that you can't see with corrosion on your electrical system from the particles that have intruded into your wall cavity. Your wall cavities are breathing, just like your house breathes. When it'll blow out and it'll suck in as you open and close doors, as you open and close your garage door. So your house is breathing. So if there's contamination in the attic, it can work its way down to other floors. Just think of a mouse. Mouse can go to all floors in your house. That it's you've got voids everywhere, but they're all communicating with each other. So it's not like the drywall stopped the contamination from going into the wall cavity. That doesn't even make any sense because it's coming from the top down in some cases.
So the bad news is that the carriers cannot save money on the total loss houses. And so the place they save money are the losses that Dawn is describing. And unfortunately, the science in this area, when I met Dawn 10 years ago, the science was in its infancy, and the science has ultimately been extremely compelling, and Dawn's predictions about where this is going have all been accurate. And unfortunately, it means that people have to invest in their own repairs or in their own investigation in order to demonstrate the scope of damage. And this is not an easy story to tell people because it's frustrating. But the truth is that, as Dawn describes, the carriers, they're going to try to save money by not looking for what's broken, because if they don't find it, they don't have to pay for it. So Fair Plan is the most extreme example because they won't look for or cover any of this. But even the other carriers, they're going to do their best to minimize the damage, to minimize the investigation, to minimize the benefits payments. And it's up to you to be your own advocate. And this is not an inexpensive process and not a perfect process. And there's going to be a range of types of investigation as Dawn's described, but it's what we have had the best success in terms of going after Fair Plan and other carriers. This is the model we use. We test houses, we get licensed contractors to measure the cost of remediation as suggested by licensed hygienists like Dawn, and then we go to bat against the carriers.
Dawn,
I think
Before I forget, there are several people mentioning that I believe you had referenced the overview that you produced, and I guess people are having trouble accessing that or don't see it in the chat. Is there a way that you could provide that again?
Yeah, so you can just put it into Google if you want. It's the chemistry of fires at the wildland urban interface. Here, I'll put the link in again. So I just put the link in again. I think it just went to you, Michael. I don't know if I don't have access to everybody, it looks like.
Okay,
Anyway,
I'll
Let me-
repost it.
Let me try. I think I can do it.
It's a free download. You can buy the book if you want. It's a paperback book. It's like $40, but it's produced by the National Academies of Sciences, and it's a consensus report. It's based on peer-reviewed published papers on this topic, and it has a whole list on what are the common fire emissions after a structure burns, and it'll have cyanide in there and benzene and formaldehyde. And so if somebody's coming in and they're using a photoionization detector to look for VOCs, which is a very common instrument that a lot of hygienists will pick up because it's cheap, and it just will give you a number. It'll say 0 or it'll say 1 or 2. It's usually like low levels, and it's measured in parts per million, or some units are measured in parts per billion. The problem is they'll take it through your house and it'll read 0. And it doesn't mean that nothing's there. What it means is that the instrument cannot see the most common fire emissions like cyanide, formaldehyde, glutaraldehyde. And it has to do with how the instrument works. It has I don't want to get into the science of the instrument. I mean, I can do that on another call or offline, but certain direct read instruments can only detect certain arrays of chemicals, and that one is used for fuel spills, for example. So could you have benzene? Yeah, you could have benzene in your fire in your house, but it would probably be early on, and that would be a chemical that's very volatile and it's going to go away very quickly. So formaldehyde is going to linger longer. The unit can't see formaldehyde, so when they bring the unit into your house, it's going to read 0, and they're going to say, see, it's clear in here, and they have the wrong tool. So the way I try to explain it to people is if you have a lion problem, but your detector can only see zebras, it's going to say you have no zebras. It's not even addressing the lions, if that makes sense to you. So if you have formaldehyde and cyanide and all these things in your house, but the meter can't detect any of that, it's going to read 0. And so ultimately they have the wrong tool to evaluate your house. And I'm just telling you this so you can challenge them when they come to your house and say, what's a PID, or are you using a PID or a photoionization detector, any kind of direct read to look for gas and vapor? Challenge them, because you'll quickly discover, whether they know what they're talking about or not. And so I think it's important for you to be educated as consumers when you're hiring people, because big decisions are going to be made on these reports. And so you want to make sure that you have somebody that knows what they're doing and will take the time to be your advocate, and the people that the insurance companies send will be industrial hygienists. They'll be but I truly believe they're being directed how to go about their methods. They'll never say that in writing. It'll never be in writing anywhere where they could, because that's against the Department of Insurance and everything. But the insurance companies will pass the buck, and they're like, we're not industrial hygienists. We hired an industrial hygiene firm for you, and they didn't find anything. Like, what do you want us to do? So they'll just, wash their hands of the whole thing. So it's real important for you to be educated. I had some of my clients, and they said the insurance is sending their hygienist over. I said, have them sample the wall cavity. Ask them to. And they said, we don't go in wall cavities. That's what the insurance consultant said. So there's a reason they don't, because like Dylan said, they're going to find damage. And if they find the damage, then they need to fix it. And they don't want to find the damage because it's going to cost more money.
Michael, I assume there's probably lots and lots of more questions. I thought with Dawn on, it might be useful to just tick through the sort of a top 10 list of things where we see damage that people may not be thinking about them. And I'll just ask Dawn to add to my list. And I'm just going to do this at a very high level very quickly, but here are things that may be damaged at your house, even if it looks intact. The large double pane windows have gas inside of them, and the heat impacts the gas, and they often fail. What will end up happening is you'll see condensation in the windows, and you won't know where it's coming from. That's where it came from, because if the gas gets heated, it expands and it blows through the seal. So we see that a lot. As relates to roofs, we very strongly encourage folks to get roofing inspections, which are imperfect, but are a good place to start. We see ember damage. We also see heat damage to roofing paper, which you're not going to see, but what you're going to find is that with the first or second or maybe third very large rain, hopefully we'll get some rain, you're going to see water intrusion in your attic. And that's what's happened, is that the roofing paper has been impacted and become brittle as a result of the heat.
And Dylan, just to interject there, in some cases it's melted from the heat. Like the felt layer is actually melted. And in one case in Colorado, the whole roofing system was melted into one piece. So there weren't layers of shingles anymore. It was all just one piece from the heat envelope, which didn't look like damage when you're standing on the sidewalk looking at the roof.
We see damage to solar panels. That's probably obvious. We see decking damage from embers. We often see heat damage to foundation systems, including exterior foundation systems like piers and slabs for your tile decking. Concrete can really be impacted by heat if it's not burned, and so you're going to want to keep an eye on your kind of exterior foundation systems. Paint deterioration is really an issue. So if you haven't painted your house in 20 years, the carrier is going to say, well, this is all lack of maintenance. But there's often profound paint and surface deterioration on homes, whether stucco or otherwise. So you want to keep an eye on that. Metal surfaces, you're going to see that often with heat impacts. And then keep an eye on just kind of everything around your house as you go out towards the street or into your yard. You're going to be wanting to look at your irrigation system. If you have one, any kind of septic, especially low voltage wiring. So any cables or phone systems or internet systems that are buried, those can often be impacted by heat. So that's kind of just a low-hanging fruit list. Obviously, gold standard is to have roofing inspection, licensed contractor, hopefully working with your hygienist to determine what's the scope of damage, but also doing inspections for all of these systems. And good news, bad news, you can often find these things, but often you don't find them for 6 months or a year. So the damage to your roofing paper, the damage to your windows, these may not be things that you see initially, and you're just going to want to keep an eye. I had a client in the Woolsey fire whose home seemed fine. She got a very small amount of money from Fair Plan. And a year later, every window in her house failed. We're talking about $500,000 worth of damage because these are windows, very large pane windows that had to be removed, stucco repairs, and so forth. And, Fair Plan, their attitude was, it didn't burn, so we're not paying for it. But we were able to prove that the fire came close enough that it impacted the seals on the windows, which all failed. So I don't know if there's any others that you've noticed in your investigations, Dawn, that you want to relate.
Well, I've seen paint bubbled on the exterior surfaces where it was close to the fire. Like I said, melted lighting in the walkways. The windows are a great one. Electronics fail mysteriously. That's a common one. I think too, I've had clients call me after they've made all the repairs that the insurance company paid for and recommended, and actually spent additional money of their own, and they all started getting health effects. And they said their dog started having symptoms, and then 2 weeks later, the whole family had it, and they were in tears. They're like, we're out of money. We've exhausted our entire life savings, and I tried to explain to them the reservoir is still there. So cleaning doesn't remove the reservoir. If you've got contamination in your drywall or in your insulation, and they only, sometimes they'll, like Dylan said, they'll take the attic insulation, but they don't take the wall insulation, and it's and many times just as contaminated. Or if you have oriented strand board in your home and the fire was close, next door to your house or whatever, your house may look like it didn't burn, but there could be charred members underneath the siding, because the different things can combust at different temperatures. So just doing a thorough investigation, something doesn't smell right or look right or feel right when you go in the house, that's where you're going to want to make sure that you're hiring somebody that can help you find that reservoir. And so once you determine where the damage is, then you can remove it. So like if we find cyanide in drywall, I don't feel like I have to prove that it's in every piece of drywall. It's in the house, in the drywall, and smoke doesn't move uniformly. So if smoke comes into your house, it doesn't fill the space evenly. It can go up this wall and over that wall, and so you know, that's proving contamination. Or your carpeting. A lot of times they'll just want to clean your carpet, but the residue will be embedded in the carpet too. So stuff, your clothes might smell right. If you have kids and they have their favorite plushes, or I would go buy them new ones. Don't bring that contamination into wherever you're living now, even if it's their favorite little stuffed animal, because it's going right in their breathing zone, and they're got little lungs. So those would be my recommendations. But it's not, when you go into your house and you say, oh, I got a little bit by the windows, a little bit by the door, you know, I can sample in the center of your dining room floor and find it. You just can't see it with the naked eye. So it's a complex chemical soup that came into your house, much more complex than a meth lab. Like a meth lab would be much simpler to clean than fire smoke, because a meth lab has 4 chemicals. Fire smoke has about 3,000. And it depends on what burned. So, you know, it's not a Smokey the Bear fire. It wasn't pine trees and pine cones on fire. It was Teslas and electronics and plastic furniture and car parts and household hazardous materials and everything that's in 12,000 homes. It's really hard to put your brain around.
Michael, did you want to go back to some, sorry, Don, I was thinking Michael wanted to go back to some questions. Did you?
Somebody
Sure.
has their hand up for a long time. I just want to make sure their question was answered.
Yeah, if somebody's live, you can.
Yeah, actually, my hand's been up for something for Dylan, but Don, thank you for all the information. But I do have a question, if you don't mind, to ask Dylan about the loss of use funds. Can we get advance of those funds and have them applied when we're buying a new replacement property?
So Christopher, it's an excellent question. The loss of use funds are not transferable. I often advise people to don't rush out of wherever you're living because the loss of use coverage is a bit of a pressure point for the carriers for complicated reasons relating to their reinsurance. They don't want to pay you that money, and so to the extent you're spending 20 grand a month or whatever it is on your rental property, it's a little bit of a pressure point in terms of the other coverages. But the short answer is no, you can't convert that. That money is intended to pay for your loss of use for the period that your house is uninhabitable. Now,
even if we buy a new house, though, if we buy a new house and if we decide not to rent and we're using the new house to live in, we can't apply those funds to the new house.
So, 2 situations: fair plan and not fair plan. So
this is USAA. So
okay, yeah. So the answer is USA policy is an additional living expense policy. So to the extent you have no additional living expenses, the answer is no. You're done with that coverage. Now they owe you all of the coverages that I described before, the A coverage, the extended, the code, and so forth. But no, that will run out. And so I typically tell people, just go slow and make sure you get the house you really want. And you've got that very solid coverage. The USA coverage tends to be very good, and USA so far has been extremely good about getting folks, advances on the personal property and so forth. The fair plan policy, just because I know we've got a bunch of fair plan folks, it doesn't matter what you do. If that house is still insured and owned by you, and if it's uninhabitable, they owe you that rental value until it's either exhausted or the house is habitable. The challenge will be, of course, houses that aren't burned to the ground. They're going to say are habitable the minute the evacuation ends and there's electric and water. And that's, as Dawn has I hopefully articulated it in from an expert's perspective, they're wrong. The houses are not habitable, at least until they're tested and confirmed to be habitable, and in many cases have very, very extensive repairs or remediation. But that isn't necessarily going to be how Fair Plan treats things. But the answer is, regarding the ALE coverage, the additional living expense coverage, is no, it's not transferable to the replacement home. Under California law, in a total loss situation, the carrier is obligated to pay 4 months ALE upfront. So
Yes,
you are entitled to
they
get
did.
that. USA has been doing that, as far as I understand.
Yeah, they did pay that. So yes, and I've asked for the 4 months, because originally it wasn't quite that amount, but I asked for it and they're paying it. So thank you. And thank you very much, Dylan, for this has been great, very insightful. And I want to thank you very much for answering my question, but also just for providing all this information to everyone.
Of course, of course. Do we want to answer some more questions?
Yeah, maybe.
Dylan,
Dylan,
sorry.
Go ahead.
Dylan, one question I have is, from your experience, how much time do you think it will take for them to put the utilities back in?
One thing I've learned over the years, sir, is I don't answer questions or try to answer questions about things that I have no idea how to answer them. So I'm going to stay in my lane and say, that your guess is as good as mine. I mean, I would imagine that the utilities are working very, very hard to get those services back. But it is just not something that I can really answer in any expert capacity.
So do they say, because my house is the only house in that whole area which is still intact, but the whole area is burnt down. So do they say that the area is livable, or my house is livable, or how does that go?
Depends on your carrier. So
Yes.
if your carrier is California Fair Plan, likely they will consider your house to be uninhabitable until your utilities are restored, and then they will tell you it's habitable. Miss Bolstad-Johnson and other experts will tell you they're wrong, and certainly that's my position. If your carrier is not California Fair Plan, probably they will do more of an investigation. It's not clear who they'll send out, but they are likely to do more of an investigation and pay you something for repairs, and then we'll give you a reasonable period of time to complete those repairs. And even with the non-Fair Plan carriers, there is likely to be a dispute about the real scope of damage and the right way to fix your house.
Okay, thanks a lot.
It might make sense if everybody writes their questions in the chat room, and then Michael reads them off for the various participants.
It is a little easier that way. I don't even have my host capabilities anymore, but just, I also think the live questions are good. It allows a little more interaction, but I'm happy to read some more off, and I'll kind of lump some of them together. We have a couple of questions related to like total losses, Dylan. And one of the questions is,
Beaver now
if,
again.
If I elect to not rebuild or not buy a new home, my home was a total loss, what happens?
So the good news is the California legislature afforded, the goal is to get people back into houses, whether that means repairing or going elsewhere. So if you've chosen, your family is safe and hopefully housed, but you've chosen to not move forward with the repair process, which will be long and challenging and will be impacted by the sheer volume of permits and architects and engineering and so forth and contractors that are in demand, then yeah, you do have the right to replace your house elsewhere. And the formula is not terribly complicated, and the carriers will fudge on this. So the formula is as I described earlier. I'm happy to say it again. You have various coverages that relate to rebuilding. The A coverage Michael described. You have the B coverage for other structures. You have various sort of sub coverages for debris removal, for landscaping. You have and often these policies will have what they call extended replacement coverage. Often that's, as Michael described, 10%, 25%, 50% of your A. And then you often have, again, that coverage that falls into that to address building code upgrades. All of those I would put into the category of the replacement benefits wallet. So that's what you're owed. That's what you're entitled to. And the question is, under what circumstances do you get to pull that money out of the wallet? And the easiest and most direct and most kind of expeditious way of getting all of your replacement benefits money is to go buy another house. Because if your limits are all told in all those coverages, your limits are $1 million, and you go buy a house tomorrow for $1,001, they owe you all of it right now. If you choose to repair, they owe you the A limit, they probably owe you the B limit, but all those subsidiary coverages, they don't owe you until you incur the cost, which is to say you start building. And that's a family choice that I can't possibly weigh into. I do want to make sure people understand the right to replace elsewhere, and there's no limit. You can buy a 1-bedroom condo in Tokyo. I mean, it's just a dollars amount, and you do, because you want to make sure you get every dollar out of that wallet. You do want to hopefully buy a property that is in excess of that amount. Now, all of this is limited by your policy limits. And so assuming you've got, policy limits that are at or below the actual cost to repair your house, which is going to be a very common situation for most people because the prices are going to be astronomical to rebuild, you do want to go and buy a house for more than that wallet, because then you get all of it right away, ideally very close to it, so you're not out of pocket.
Dylan, can I ask you?
I hope that addresses the question.
Can I ask you a question on that? If I have additional endorsements for the extended replacement, and then on top of that, the law and ordinance, if you buy a replacement property, can you get the benefit of those caps, or do you kind of lose those caps?
No, the carriers fudged on this for many years, and we filed a lot of lawsuits, and eventually the legislature fixed this. So the answer to your question is you get it all. Every coverage. And it doesn't matter what they've put or not put into that replacement estimate, because as we talked about earlier, the wallet is a function of how much it costs to fix the house that burned down. So if you have $1 million in coverage all in, all those coverages, but it only costs, the estimate is only for $500,000, well, then you have a problem. Because then the carrier is telling you, you might have $1 million in coverage, but we estimate the cost to rebuild your house at $500,000. So that's the limit of your wallet. I would say that in most of the total loss situations in Los Angeles, because of the pricing that's going to be happening in the next, year to 5 years, that's going to be a rare situation. Most people have too little insurance, and most of these houses are going to be rebuilt at a very, very high number. So my gut is that dispute is not going to be the issue. The issue is going to be with the houses that didn't burn to the ground. So the answer to your question is, if you have coverage for $1 million all in, A coverage, B coverage, extended code, debris removal, landscaping, just add it all up, and that's your number. That's what's in that replacement benefits wallet. And in order to get access to all of that money at once, one option is to go buy a house for slightly more than is in that wallet. And that includes your closing costs, that includes your inspection costs, it includes anything relating to the purchase of your new property. And the carriers, they had all kinds of fudges on this, where they were deducting the land value of the new property or deducting various things about the difference in the types of houses. None of that flies. You may use that money.
Are you still subject to a contractor's quote then, or can you just go buy over your wallet amount and then get everything? Or do you still have to have a contractor validate?
So the wallet is created initially by the carrier. So the carrier says, this is the amount we estimate it's going to cost you to put back the thing that was there. And they create an estimate. That estimate, as I've said, in most, my gut is that in most cases, that estimate is going to exceed your full wallet, because the costs in Los Angeles, the real costs, are going to be so high. Now, I'm sure my contractor friends who are on this call are gonna call me up and laugh at me, and they're all going to say, no, the carriers are going to lowball, and that may happen. Now, if that occurs, which is to say, if the replacement estimate for the house that burned down is less than your limits, then you have a fight. Do you want to get to those limits? And when I say limits, I mean all in, all coverages that relate to repairs, only excluding loss of use and contents. So if it turns out that the carrier, your coverage all in is $1 million and the carrier comes in at $500,000, then you have a fight. The way to address that fight is not complicated. You go out and you find a real contractor who builds things to provide an estimate. That can be that can cost you some money, but it's money well spent. I'm hoping that most people won't have to do that because, as I've said, typically people are underinsured, not overinsured. So typically, especially in a situation where the cost of repair, the cost of reconstruction is going to be, I'm guessing, but I would imagine 800 plus per square foot. You're mostly going to be in situations where the real cost is going to wildly exceed the policy limits.
Thank you very much.
Hopefully you're not going to be in that situation. If you are, find a contractor, and there will be no shortage of excellent licensed contractors willing to take your money to do a really good replacement estimate. The carriers, it's going to range. Some of the carriers will try to lowball and will try to save money here, and they're going to get hammered because the actual costs to do this work in Los Angeles in the next 5 years are going to be astronomical.
Dylan.
Yes.
So, if you choose not to rebuild and or not to buy another house, can you take the wallet?
I'm sorry, I lost you after wallet.
Oh, if you choose not to rebuild or buy another house, what happened to the insurance settlement?
The carrier will pay you, so they'll do that replacement estimate. So let's say you have $1 million all in, and you have a replacement estimate the carrier produces that says, okay, in order to put this house back, it's going to cost $1.5 million. So you've got your wallet, which is filled with $1 million, and you've got a replacement estimate which is in excess of that. So you're good. You have access to that full $1 million. You only have two choices: replace or rebuild. If you do nothing, they will send you the A limit. And mostly depends on the nature of your house. If you have a decent amount of other structures, sheds, fences, irrigation lines, pools, they will send you the B limit, which is typically a percentage of the A limit. And the B limit applies to what Michael described correctly as other structures. It's really just an insurance term of art, which means stuff that isn't connected to your house. So fences, sheds, irrigation lines, pools, cottages, and so forth. Now, some people will have specific coverage for those other structures, and that's beyond our scope here. But so they will pay you the A limit and the B limit, but they will not pay you any of the items that have to be incurred, whether by actually doing the repairs or going to buy another house.
Thank you.
And just so we're clear, once you receive that money, the A limit, the B limit, that money's yours. You can do with it what you want. You can pay off your mortgage. You can go buy an airplane. You can do anything you want with it. It's not, there's no requirement that you use that money to do anything at all. I'm going to kill my video and hope it gets a little clearer. Sorry.
Dylan, another question that just came through is, do you have a certain amount of time that you must rebuild your home?
Michael, for whatever reason, the video just died, so I'll keep going, and if you can fix that, I don't know if you can or not. It just says cannot start your video because the host has stopped it. So, but let me address the question.
I was having Dawn change to make me the host, but maybe it messed it up.
Oh, okay. Well, let me answer the question. As I said, I don't want to waste anyone's time. The answer is that the policy typically provides 12 months from the first actual cash value payment. So the loss happens on January 1. I'm just using to make life easy, but it takes the carrier 3 months to get you that A limit actual cash value payment. So once they pay you that, you typically, in a normal situation, you have 12 months. You also can ask for extensions because repairs take a long time and the carrier has to be reasonable about giving you extensions. Now, in a declared emergency like this one, the legislature has provided a very, very substantial additional amount of time, and that's 36 months. So, Michael, you mentioned that earlier, and I can never remember whether it's 24 or 36, but I'm gonna assume Michael did his homework, and it's 36 months.
It's with good cause, the additional 12-month extension.
Okay, so it's 24 guaranteed, and then additional 12. But the thing to keep in mind is communicate with your carrier. If you're going to repair, the repair time as to these losses is going to be very, very long. People, it's going to take you time to get an architect and engineer and plans and permits and get a contractor in place. And maybe there'll be demands on building materials that will slow things up. Just communicate that to your carrier in writing. I'm working on it. I'm doing what I can. My contractor's in place. I've paid the deposit. I've put aside the money, but it's going to take me an extra amount of time. So if we're having this conversation 24 months or 36 months from now, I will not be surprised. This is going to be a process, and these neighborhoods are going to be heavily impacted by this repair journey that you're all going to be on, and the carriers are going to have to be reasonable about it. So short answer is there are time limits, but the time limits must be reasonable, must be flexible. There have been substantially extended. My guess is that there'll be some other kinds of relief along the way, because this particular fire is going to result in a very extended period of repair and putting things back. So keep your eye on developments at the Department of Insurance, but generally communicate with your carrier. If you're in the repair process, send them an update, every 3 months. Hey, we're working on it, but we're still in the process.
Yeah, Dylan, can I ask you a question about non-admitted carriers?
Sure.
Okay. About a year ago, I and my husband did an extensive renovation of our house in Pacific Palisades. We spent about $700,000. At the time, my broker, who I've had for years because my mom had him and all this other stuff, convinced me to get a construction. We didn't do a lot of construction. It was mainly interior work that was done. But she convinced me that I needed to leave Travelers and get a construction policy. And my contractor at the time said he'd never heard of that for this sort of work. But in any event, I did it. We had to go back then, when the construction or the interior was finished, and we couldn't get Travelers back anymore. So I was okay with California Fair Plan because I had it years ago in a house I used to have. But she convinced me I needed to go and stay with KW Specialty, who had done the construction policy. And so we went with them, but they are a non-admitted carrier, and the coverage, we have a lot of stuff in the house. Their coverage for what's in the house is probably 30% of the value. So I'm also a little concerned as to whether California protects you if you have a non-admitted carrier and they go bankrupt.
So all excellent questions, probably a little beyond kind of the scope of what I'm prepared to talk about today, not because they're not good, excellent questions, but because it might make sense for us to kind of address this directly. And I'm happy to do that. But let me just say generally, the rules that I've identified today apply to carriers in California if they want to do business here, full stop. So everything I've said applies to your carrier. Now, the bankruptcy question, that's a more challenging one and a meaningful one, and a one that you should get your money as fast as you can if you're concerned. The Department of Insurance typically, these non-admitted carriers typically have very modest exposures in this state. So if they go under, typically the regulator will step in and cover sort of, or the legislature will cover losses. But there is a process that they follow if there is a bankruptcy or a threatened bankruptcy or any kind of Chapter 7 or Chapter 11 problem. So and that is not something I'm an expert on. But if they're not actually in your organization or bankruptcy, really it's just a question of what your policy covers. And I'm happy to take a look at the coverages and talk you through it. Now, you've described a 30% of the contents coverage of the value. Well, that's an underinsurance question. And I will say that is a ubiquitous problem in the state. There are firms that specialize in that, and my firm has historically not really delved into those kinds of questions, but they're complicated. The rules are not particularly consumer friendly in the state. They're very challenging, but if you believe that you're underinsured, you do want to seek legal advice on that issue. And I would say that for everybody here, if there's a real gap in what your coverages are, talk to a lawyer about it who specializes in this area. And there are excellent firms who do. My firm is not one of them.
Oh, okay. Well, I don't know if you have anyone you'd recommend, but maybe I can send you an email about that or something.
Generally, what I'd say to people about seeking legal advice is like this. United Policyholders is the go-to consumer rights organization for property insurance in this state. Its founder was one of my classmates in law school. She's to call her a gem or a is ungenerous. She's an extraordinary person who's dedicated her adult life to helping consumers for very modest returns, unlike the plaintiff's bar. So go look at United Policyholders, and on that website there's going to be excellent listings for lawyers. Those are all lawyers who participate in United Policyholders, who support United Policyholders, and I would start there. And typically my firm, it's small, we have a limited amount of bandwidth, so when people ask me for guidance, I don't really give them the names of specific law firms. I say, go to United Policyholders. I mean, look at the firms there and talk to the people who are listed there. And everybody, my view is that everybody on there is highly competent. Now, who is actually taking on the underinsurance specific claims? That's, you're going to have to kind of poke around. And if you're good on the internet, you just find the lawsuits, because there's plenty of them in California, federal and state, and you just see who's litigating them. I mean, you will not find my firm on those lawsuits.
I think part of the problem was my broker trying to get coverage. There was like a 2 month.
Shall I text it to you or just say?
I'm sorry.
63.
No, we have somebody who needs to mute.
92280.
Sorry, if everybody could remain on mute if you're not speaking.
Anyway,
I would encourage you to email me offline, and let's see.
I'm going to send you an email. Thank you. I appreciate it very much.
3829228.
Can you go on mute, please? Dylan, a couple questions that may pertain to some. There were some questions about DIC wrap policies. Is there any potential chance that there's any form of coverage related to these fires? Some of the questions pertain to the fact that wind was in part a cause of this.
Excellent question.
Hold on. We gotta find a way, because I don't have host controls right now. Let me find a way to mute her.
The question's an excellent question, and I've had it from a number of folks, and it gets into a very interesting and complicated area of law. As you might imagine, insurance coverage is all about my camera's doing that strange thing again. Let me see if I can fix this again. Insurance coverage is all based on what's the cause of loss, and losses are typically have multiple causes. I'm sorry about this. I don't know what's going on with my camera. It's kind of fuzzy now. In any case, I'll just manage. Coverages depends on what the cause of the loss is, and some of it's easy, right? Your house burned to the ground, causes fire. Fire is a covered peril under both the Fair Plan policy and the typical retail policy, which we describe as an all-risk policy. Someone in the chat earlier asked, what about mudslides that result from fires? And the Department of Insurance has been very good on this, and has said that where there's been substantial denuding of landscape, and that's resulted in from fire, and that's resulted in mudslides, the cause of those losses is fire, not mudslides, because mudslides are not going to be covered under your Fair Plan policy or really any policy. But the department has said the cause, we call it the predominant cause, the most important cause of those losses is fire. So let's now go to your DIC policy. Most likely, the DIC policies are not going to cover these losses, because it's going to be hard to argue that the predominant cause of these losses is anything other than fire. Now, there will be exceptions to that, as there always are in any situation. And so if you have a house that is not burned, melted, or has substantially smoke damage, but or may have smoke damage, but also has wind damage, you know, you've got an interesting situation. And I would encourage you to talk to lawyers if you're not satisfied with whatever you get from your carrier for the fire damage, because it may be that the DIC policy, difference in conditions policy, which often the carriers issue as a wraparound for the Fair Plan fire coverage, you know, they will cover wind, and you know, it sort of just depends on the situation. It's an interesting question. I haven't taken it on in this context. As I said, the mudslides are an interesting example, and the DOI has been pretty good about that and has forced the carriers to cover those. So we'll see what happens. But I would say, you know, kind of apropos what I said very early on, be your own advocate. Be smart, use the skills that you develop to advocate for yourself. And if you need help, call a competent law firm.
On that note, there was a question, if I understand it correctly, if there is a dispute with the carrier, how do you discern whether it's more appropriate for a public adjuster versus an attorney?
I have to be careful here because there's some of my public adjuster pals and referral sources are on this. I mean, there's it really depends on the person. So for instance, there's law firms, and you may be contacted by some of these law firms who are basically acting like super public adjusters. They're, you know, and they're very good at it. And they will, you know, charge you 5, 10, 15% of your policy benefits to sort of, you know, take over. And they will, you know, what folks do before we file lawsuits is they do all the things we've talked about. They obtain the expert evidence. They interface with the insurance carrier. They advocate for you when the insurance carrier, you know, tries to save money. So whether that's a lawyer or a public adjuster, it's really more about the quality of the individual or the firm. And I, you know, I'm not in a position where I can sort of say this firm, not that firm, or this PA or not that PA. I mean, there's, as in all areas of professional life, there's, you know, there's good, bad, you know, terrible, and excellent, and some of it depends on who you are and the sort of, you know, sort of person that you want to work with. There's also going to be a wide variety of rates. Anybody who's charging more than, in my opinion, 10 or 15% is you know, is too much. Now, if you get to a point where you have a dispute and it doesn't seem like the dispute is going anywhere, then my view is that it's time to hire a law firm, because that is the sort of thing that you want to make sure that you're setting up for litigation if you are inclined to go that direction. All of that is the general rule, but it very much depends on who you're working with, because there's really phenomenal public adjusters in this state who, you know, can take you all the way up to the, you know, the day you walk in the courthouse. And we work very closely with those folks. And, you know, if you can get to them, again, the California Public Adjusters Association is a great resource. United Policyholders is also a great resource for listings for those folks.
Dylan, this question has been posted twice, so I want to get to it. And it may relate to several people, but this attendee is asking, my mom is staying with us after being evacuated. Insurance, State Farm asked us to make a rental agreement and charge her rent. How much do we charge? Does this relate to fair rental value?
Obviously, I can't. So in the fair plan situation, it's not complicated, because as I've described, it's the measure of the loss, the measure of the benefits you're owed is the fair rental value of your house up to 1/12 of the coverage. One thing everybody should understand about the fair plan coverage is it doesn't end with the stated limit. That's very important to understand. And fair plan will not tell you this. So if you go to your declarations page, which Michael showed you, it has a fair rental value line. Some people have 0. Some people have an amount of money. Start with that amount of money. But if the house is still standing, you can then draw 10% from the A limit. That adds to your limit on the fair rental value. So let's say you've got $100,000 stated, but you've got $1 million coverage. There's another $100,000 available to you on that policy benefit. Also, you get 10% of your extended coverage. So you've got $1 million in coverage under a fair plan policy, $100,000 fair rental value stated benefit, and then an additional $200,000 worth of extended, then you get that extra $20,000. So you take 10% of the A, 10% of the extended, and whatever stated you have, and that's the total limit. Even if your fair rental value is 0, you still get to use 10% of the A limit and 10% of the extended. So there may be benefits there that you're not aware of. Now, if it's not a fair plan policy and it's an ALE policy, it's a very difficult question to answer without much more information. What I can say is be reasonable. If you're renting a portion of your house, you look at what they might have to pay, which is the full boat for whatever the place was that burned to the ground. So if your mom was living in a 4-bedroom, a 5-bathroom house in Pacific Palisades, that house is $40,000 a month. So that's the sort of the amount that the carrier might have to pay if your mom went out and rented a 4-bedroom, 5-bathroom house, which she's entitled to. Are you going to charge them $40,000 a month? No. But somewhere between $0 and $40,000. I mean, that's an inadequate answer, but that's the best I can do.
Maybe we'll tackle a couple more. I know we're probably running short on time, and I thank you all for your patience and attendance. I dropped Dylan's email as well as my email into the chat. We're also easy to find online if anybody wants to reach out to us with particular questions. One of the questions
with the caveat that please be patient, because I haven't had a whole lot of sleep, as I know you haven't, and I'm not comparing my situation to yours in any way, but haven't had a whole lot of sleep in the last couple of weeks, and that will probably go on for the next several months at the same time as I'm trying to practice law. So be patient. I will respond to every email, but it might take some time.
So this question pertains to mortgages. If one takes insurance money to replace instead of rebuild, do you know what happens to the original land and mortgage?
Well, the land is your land. And I think there's going to be a pretty substantial market in that property. I would imagine that there's going to be developers snapping up that land all over the place. So it'll be a pretty real market. I wouldn't be hasty. I would see sort of where things go. I mean, my experience with the other wildfires is that there's a big market dip initially, and then it kind of creeps up. So I would hang on if you can. That said, I can't answer the question about the mortgage. My guess is that it'll be a real variety among the mortgage companies. Your mortgage doesn't go away. It's a debt, and you're still owed it. But I'm not a mortgage expert, and I strongly encourage anybody who's in that situation to work with the mortgage company. Maybe get legal advice, because there can be forms of relief available if you're having to move without rebuilding. So I would encourage you to explore that, but it's really not my specialty.
There was one more that I wanted to get to here. There's many more, but so this is from Edith. She was asking to clarify the role of land value in trying to maximize reimbursement benefits wallet. And her example is, say insurance I think she means the cost of the building is $2 million, land value is $1 million. Should the purchase price be in excess of $2 million or $3 million? What are we comparing? Are we calculating land value into the replacement cost?
Great question. And there's sort of two land values that could conceivably be taken into consideration. One is the land value of your burn down property. One is the land value of the replacement property. And the answer is actually very simple, neither. The replacement benefits wallet is created by the cost to put back what was there. The land is not covered, but there's sort of aspects of the land that are covered in the sense of the landscaping and debris removal and that sort of thing. But the actual land, it's not covered under most insurance policies. There are some exceptions. So if you have a Chubb policy, or you have an AIG policy, or you have a very, very high-end property policy, please send it to me and let me talk to you about whether those things are covered, because they can be. But most retail policies, land is not covered. But it really doesn't matter, because when you're doing that analysis of your replacement benefits wallet, you're still asking the same question. What does it cost to put the house back? Just got nothing to do with the land. So your replacement, it's going to cost you $2 million to put that house back, all in. Engineering, architecture, code, all of the costs associated with putting back the house even if you had no insurance. Like, what is it going to cost? Okay. So you created your replacement benefits wallet. Assuming that exceeds your limits, which I'm hoping in most cases it does, they owe you all that money. The question is, how do you get the money out of the wallet? If you go to buy a house over here, it doesn't make a difference what the house is. It can be a condo in Tokyo. It can be a teepee on 1,000 acres in Mongolia. It can be a condo or a home on a small lot in San Francisco, or it can be the house next door to the house that burned down. It makes no difference. What your goal there is to maximize, is to get above the amount in that wallet by, $1 or 25 cents. Then they owe you everything, but you haven't spent too much. And now, obviously, if you're a person that has the resources and you can go out and buy a house that, your dream house, and it's 5 times the replacement benefits wallet, no problem. They still owe you the maximum of that wallet. That's the contract. The carriers for many years tried to say, okay, I'm going to buy a house for $2 million. And then they would say, and your replacement wallet was $2 million. So you said, okay, I want my $2 million. And they say, no, no, no. We're going to deduct the value of the land at the new property. So really, you're only entitled to $1.5 million because the value of the land at the new property is $500,000. And after my firm and others filed lawsuits and the legislature changed the rule, they can't do that anymore. So if they try to do that, send them a mean letter, or call me up and I'll send them a mean letter on your behalf for free, because I'm very pleased to have beaten that issue, because it was a real problem for folks, because of course there's a limit to what the resources people have to replace their houses. So you don't want kind of to face that kind of deduction. So I hope that answers your question.
Dylan, do you have to prove that? So do you have to provide them a copy of the sales contract to show that you actually bought the new replacement house, or can you just say that? Oh, you do. Okay.
Yeah. So I mean, this is a little bit of a gray area. I mean, what do you have to actually close? My opinion is no. You have to be in contract, and you got to say, okay, look, this is the thing, and I need the money to buy the house. And I think most carriers will once you're in contract, most carriers will fund it at that point. It's probably a little bit of a gray area, because have you actually spent the money when you sign the contract? No, but it's close enough. If you just say to them, hey, I want to go buy a house, not enough. You got to identify a property, and you got to actually, and because the idea, again, the policy idea behind this is you want people to get into new houses. So whether that house is, as I said, in Tokyo or in San Francisco or in LA, at least you're going to be someplace. You're not going to be homeless. So they want to know that you're buying a house. So you have to incur the expense, and the word incur is a legal term, and it generally means becoming responsible for something. So it's like, okay, if you're repairing, you do, in order to get the whole wallet, you do need to actually incur the cost, but you probably don't need to spend it. If you have a construction contract and you're starting to spend money, I think you can go to the carrier and reasonably ask for the full boat. Same thing with the replacement, but you are going to have to demonstrate that you're really going to spend the money.
Thank you.
There are 3 people, I think, with their hands up. I don't know how long that's been, but maybe we can tackle a couple more. Jerry and Sharon, do you have a question?
Okay, I'm unmuted now.
There we go.
We had 2 houses side by side, and they were destroyed totally. But some of my extensive video pottery collection is buried in the rubble. My documentation of the collection was destroyed when my safety deposit boxes burned up in the banks. So my question is, how do I retrieve the remnants to validate my claim? And if they are in decent shape, when I find them, will they have absorbed toxic chemicals, or would they be unsafe to retrieve?
Sharon, extraordinary situation. I'm terribly sorry about you're losing your homes, and there's a lot there. Probably some of it we should address offline, but let me see if I can hit the high points. Who's your carrier?
The Our main house is California Fair Plan with KW backup and Travelers on the second.
Okay, so it's a little complicated because I don't know who exactly covered it's a pottery collection? Is that what you described?
Yes,
Okay, so I don't know exactly who covered it, which house it's in. Was that in the Fair Plan house or in the Traveler's house?
in both.
Oh,
We were
okay.
supposed to start construction remodeling March 1st on our main house, and we were moving in to the second house temporarily. So 50-50 of our possessions were divided.
Okay, so you need help. I mean, this is one of those situations where very complicated situation. Your obligation is to demonstrate the value of the lost property. If it's damaged or destroyed, you'll have to demonstrate that. But there's no magic formula for demonstrating that. Some people will have appraisals and pictures of things that were destroyed. Some people won't, and the carriers can only ask you to do what you can do. So obviously, this probably goes without saying. You don't want to commit fraud. Nobody should be lying to carriers about what they had. Nobody who didn't have a Ferrari, 65 Ferrari Testarossa should be saying they did. But you obviously had a very valuable collection. I don't know the extent to which it's covered under your policies. That we'd have to sort that out by way of looking at them. I'm happy to do that. So the answer is you need to figure out what's broken, figure out how much it costs to replace it, and and demand benefits payments for that based on whatever proof you have. The proof does not have to be perfect. I would imagine that you will be able to find in some fashion photographs that you took that maybe you're at social media or that friends or family have, or that maybe were part of some show at some point. I mean, you got to kind of rack your brain and find whatever you can by way of evidence of the existence of the stuff. And then it sounds like some of it maybe can be retrieved. As relates to the scope of damage, way beyond my pay grade, what I'd say is have somebody look at it. Have an expert come in and say, okay, these have lost all their value because they've been impacted by these contaminants, or no, these can be remediated, but it's going to cost $1 zillion, and it's probably better just to pay the limits and move on. And all of that will sort of depend on the specifics of the damage. So I would strongly recommend that if we're talking about a substantial loss, that you get some help, both expert and potentially legal. And I'm happy to talk you through it offline. I would want to just see the policies and then just talk you through kind of what you need in terms of the evidence.
Great, thank you very much.
Of course.
Do you know of any resources that can help us dig through the rubble to pull these things out?
Yeah, I don't. I mean, there's I wouldn't even really know what kind of category to put that in, because you're talking about maybe like art restoration people, as opposed to, there's plenty of people that are going to be willing to come in and, demolish things or remove debris, but that's not what you're talking about. You're talking about maybe, somebody in the art restoration world. So you might look in that area, but it's really not, I understand the question. I don't have an answer for you. I'm sorry.
Thank you very much.
For everyone who's still attending, feel free to email me. We'll find a way to make all of the information, the video recording, as well as the documents that were shared, publicly available in the easiest accessible way possible. But if not, and if you want them immediately, you can email me. Dylan, do you have maybe 5 or 10 more minutes to answer the last 2 hands up questions?
I'm well past my go to bed time, so I'm in for whatever makes sense for you and your staff and the folks online. And also, I just want to make sure anybody who's left knows I'm available, and I'm happy to do additional Zooms if it makes sense to do more, public stuff.
So I'll probably close after these last 2, but I know some of these, Edith, I'll invite you to ask your question now. Let me see if I can unmute you. You might have to do it on your end.
You already answered my question. It had to do with the land value. And Dylan answered the question. So thank you very much. Yeah.
Of course.
You're welcome.
Uh,
If you hear another story from your carrier, Edith, immediately email me.
Okay.
Because that's a battle I won, and there aren't that many battles that I won, but that's a battle that I won, and it was a hard fight, and I'm not interested in them backsliding on that. So I will definitely take that on if they go at you, but I don't think they will. The statute is very clear at this point.
Okay, that's the deal, Dylan.
Very good.
I'm glad you are in the forefront on this area.
My wife and 15-year-old are not so glad, but you know, it's gotta make a buck.
Yeah. Great. Thank you.
Thanks, Edith. Court, you have a question?
Yeah. Hi, guys. My question's for Dawn. Dawn, do you have any thoughts on Phos-Check, the fire retardant? It was dropped really heavily on my neighborhood, Mandeville Canyon.
That would be something that you definitely want to test for the residues. I'm not sure what's in it, but fire retardant doesn't seem to decay very quickly. And it's in all of our belongings too. It's in the plastics in our TVs and everything. So I'd have to look at what the ingredients are. If it's phosphate based, or we'd have to look. I mean, I would recommend that. I'm not saying if you hire me, but whoever you hire, you may want to have them take a closer look at that for sure. Because if that got in your HVAC system, that can be, it may not show up in other testing if you're not looking specifically for that.
Yeah, okay. Well, it's mainly fertilizer, and the obvious concerning contents are ammonium phosphate and high levels of heavy metals like cadmium, chromium, vanadium, maybe other.
Yeah, so you can do heavy metals testing. You can do some swabs for that, and you could also do like a microvac sample if you've got that residue inside your house or around your house. And I would test for it in your house because that's your living space, and on your house if it got on your house.
Okay, thanks.
Dawn, while I have you, there were a couple questions, and one just came through that are and we'll make this the final one. I apologize for those questions that didn't get answered, but we're going on I think 2.5 hours, almost 3 hours. But Dawn, questions pertaining to, and I'm sure this is particular to each home or personal property, but you got some concerned listeners and they're wondering, you know, is this a situation where it's going to be necessary from a hygienist point of view where everything needs to be thrown out, whether we're talking about personal property, drywall, insulation, materials for the dwelling itself?
I think the answer to that question is it depends. You know, you have to have somebody determine the extent of fire damage. It depends on how close you were to the fire, how much got in your house, what the levels are in your house. I mean, that's how we approach it. We don't have a one size fits all. So I wish there was, because then you could say, oh, in this situation, you do X, Y, and Z, but it's not that simple. So we'd have to look at the intrusion to your house. Did it get in? How bad is it? You know, is it something that's cleanable? I know there's somebody else asked about, do you have to tear out all the drywall? That depends too on, is the drywall contaminated? Are we seeing visual evidence? Are we seeing gas and vapor evidence? Are we seeing particle evidence? So I always call what we do as an orthogonal approach, where it's confirmation. Each layer of testing we do confirms the presence of fire damage. So it's layers of confirmation is what way I look at it. So it's you really have to have a proper assessment to make that determination. There's some people out there that test clothes that say the clothes can't be cleaned. And I think that depends too. It depends on just, you know, it's length of time, it's dose makes the poison. So some of these cases, the fire moved through, but the smoke could come back and hit the house again. So now you've got, you know, more exposure than just the initial fire. You've got the bank of smoke that's just maybe a cloud over your house or a cloud through your house again and again. So you really have to have that assessment, in my opinion. I'm sorry I can't give you a blanket approach, but the house, some of the porous materials become the reservoir, and that needs to be investigated by somebody who knows what they're doing.
Understandable. Yeah, I'm thankful, Dawn, for all of the advice you were able to provide. And Dylan, once again, thank you so much for participating. I know that a lot of the people had very different questions, and I think you did a great job answering all of them. Unfortunately, we couldn't get to some of them, but again, reach out to Dylan if, as time allows. As he said, and maybe you can hold him to this, he will respond eventually to all emails. He's extremely busy, but I want to thank you personally for all the information you've shared with me and for everyone who attended.
It's my pleasure. And, I'm often asked, I was asked by a very high-powered lawyer yesterday who was asking me about his multi-million-dollar home that was lost in the Palisades. And he said, what's in it for you? And the answer really at the highest level is that I believe that the information I have is a gift, and it's necessary, or I'm responsible for sharing it not because I can make a living doing it, which I make a very healthy living, and I'm proud of the work we do, but because ultimately the information I have is of value to people and can help people, and that's the joy of what I do. So what's in it for me at the moment is not money. It's just being able to help even a few people get through this process with slightly less trauma than is usual. So it's my pleasure, and I am happy to speak with people offline and to join another session if that makes sense down the road.
Thank you so much, Michael and Dylan. It was very, very fruitful, and I hope we'll do it again later in a month or so.
For sure.
Hey, thank you very much. It's been extremely helpful.
Absolutely.
Glad.
You're welcome. Thank you, everyone.
And Michael, I've had a number of people ask me about the recording. Are you gonna put a link someplace or?
Yeah, I'll find a way, as opposed to some people have emailed me, I'll make sure that we respond and send them directly to everyone who emails. But beyond that, we'll find a way to make this publicly available to everyone so you can share it with others. This is the whole intention here, is to share this information with as many people as possible. As Dylan said, his knowledge, my limited knowledge in this space is really a privilege and something that we're, at least speaking on my behalf and Dylan's behalf, we're not trying to monetize. We're trying to inform you so that you can take a measured approach and really not rush out, do things because I know how traumatic this is for everybody, and be educated in all the decisions that you make. So we will find a way. I'm not super tech savvy, but we'll find a way either to get a YouTube link put up or however else is easiest for the most number of people to review the material and learn from it.
Very good. Good luck to you all. I appreciate it. I'll respond to inquiries as they come in.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Where do we find your email information?
You're asking about me?
Both.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I'll put it in the chat again. So I'll put mine and Dylan's email. You can also just by name, State Bar has our email addresses or our websites, but I'll put them in the chat again.
If you do a search for just my first name and Fair Plan, you're gonna find a lot of
That's how I found Dylan.
a lot of mean things said about me, but that's fine. It's a badge of honor.
What's Don's last name?
It's Bolstad-Johnson, BOLSTAD-Johnson.
I did put a link to her firm in the chat. It's Kaizen Safety Solutions, and I know she'll be incredibly busy over the next several months, but we'll definitely try to include her in future presentations.
All right. Good night, everyone.
Thank you, Michael.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.